The oceans breathe in slow, tidal murmurs along the first settled shores. Huts of reed and brush hold their shape in the dusk. Hearthstones keep a low heat, and above the estuaries a clear sky unfurls without interruption. There is no urgency in it, only arrangement. The band of the Milky Way, arcing like a pale river. A steady lantern of a planet near the horizon. The patient tilt of the moon. What rises tonight rises again tomorrow with almost no change, and that steadiness invites attention. Those who move quietly among eelgrass and shell heaps do not need names for the patterns to feel their recurrence. The constellations as patterns are familiar in this long evening. The lights themselves are older than memory, and the heavens seem to breathe with the sea. Coastlines lie farther out than they will in later ages. The world still recovers from the burden of vanished ice, and the seas continue their quiet expansion into lowlands. Old dunes turn to bars offshore. Black stumps of drowned trunks stand where a forest met the wind. Shell middens grow beside bedding of eelgrass, and the brackish smell of the estuary mingles with smoke. Facts accumulate here without effort. Sea level rises with warmth. Tides answer the moon with a rhythm that can be counted. Seasons return because the planet leans as it goes around the Sunday. This is not theory to those on the shore, only dependable recurrence like footprints that fill and empty with each tide. Along the wet flats, small waves brush the edges of sleeping fish and wake blue sparks. Plankton lift their light in response to touch, and the water becomes a liquid constellation that breaks and reforms around each step. Far above, another glow shows itself to patient eyes. The upper air, stirred by rare particles and by sunlight grazing along the planet's curve, gives off a faint green sheen. Even when every fire is out, the sky refuses absolute darkness. Night has its own phosphorescence. This quiet presence is a lesser-known companion that belongs to all eras. A veil that does not announce itself, but remains for anyone who learns to notice. The sea answers with its own soft lamps, and shore and sky exchange light as if breathing together. Watching begins because pattern makes it gentle. Sight lines are fixed with driftwood stakes and stones pressed into the mud where the estuary widens toward the sea. A notch in a hill becomes a guide for the moon's rising point. A forked branch suggests a frame through which a bright star passes at the same season each year. Marks multiply but remain unassuming. A stripe of cleared reeds, a gap left in a fence of brush, a sequence of rounded pebbles set at ankle height. The sky is not mastered here. It is referenced. As a farmer references a bend in a river, as a netmaker uses a knot. The notes are simple at this place. Then that and the work of remembering grows in the hands and in the eyes. A puzzle forms within that persistence and stays softly unresolved. Why does careful sky watching arise so early and so widely, beyond what food or shelter strictly demand? The needs of tide and season explain much. Fish runs favor certain temperatures and moonlit nights. Shellfish are safer or dangerous, depending on blooms that gather with the moon's cycle. Migratory arrivals are foretold by particular stars, appearing in particular dawns. Yet the habit reaches past necessity. Alignments extend into times no one living will see. A stake is set for the return of a rising that comes after many winters, and the stake remains when its setter is gone. The practice seems to ask for the long view as calmly as the shore asks for patience, and the reason for such length remains a soft mystery. Another fact settles gently with the rest. The sky changes on spans that exceed a life. The Earth's axis traces a wide circle through the heavens over long thousands of years, and the northern point of the sky wanders. What marks north now will drift, and the role of polar guide will pass among bright points and sometimes to none at all. Lines of sunrise and sunset, written into the ground, keep their truth, but lines to particular stars demand tending across generations. Knowledge adapts where it stands. A child who sees a star touch A marker will see it miss the marker as an elder, and the stone will be moved a hand's width to regain the touch. The heavens are steady enough to trust and slow enough to change, like a tide measured on a very long shore. Underfoot, small things testify. Pollen settles in tight curves within peat. Grains of wind-blown dust lodge between shell and grit, and ash from cold hearths darkens soil by a shade. Much later, after the shore has crept inland and part of this settlement has slipped under water, those spirals and dark seams will be read again. They will reveal that coasts and the people on them shifted with the sea's advance, building and rebuilding where the estuary allowed. They will also show thin lenses of charcoal from distant fires carried by wind, reminders that even quiet centuries are visited by ash. In these layers, the story of patient watching will be inferred not from words, but from arrangements. Aligned posts, paired stones, clearings that point to the same places in the sky. In such places, conjecture has room to arise without urgency. One hypothesis, held at arm's length and spoken quietly even by those who consider it, imagines watchful minds elsewhere in this vast night, noticing Earth's small changes in glow and shadow, and choosing moments to pass near. If movement between stars is possible at all, it may favor extremely slow courses and resting regions where opposing pulls balance into stillness. Patient travelers along such lines would be easiest to notice when the world is dim and unhurried, when the only light is the sea's cold fire and the sky's faint veil. The thought does not claim, it merely lingers, a possibility placed beside others. Against that speculation, the sufficiency of human reasons stands. Food must be gathered within safe bounds of salinity and season. Boats must be launched at the hour when river and sea agree. Storms must be anticipated by their heralds in swell and cloud. A sense for large-scale order satisfies a need for beauty as well. The arrangements set into shore and stone answer both hunger and wonder. They are not announcements to the sky, but mirrors of it, made at human scale. A post to mark a rising, a notch aligned to a setting, a path cleared so that a bright point can be seen unbroken across the water. Like a slow metronome, the heavens offer intervals. The hands on the shore record them with quiet tools. Quiet details gather at the edges of vision. Before dawn, a pale wedge climbs from the horizon, the soft gleam of dust along the sun's path. Opposite the sun at midnight, a dim patch sometimes brightens where light scattered by dust meets itself again. Low over the sea, stars shimmer as the air ripples, turning points into threads and back again. None of this requires anything beyond itself. The planet is a lens, the air a thin filter, the sea a mirror. Such small optics ask for no interpretation, yet they convince some that attention is its own answer, that to watch is to belong to the slow motions that pass through all things. The same seabed, shifting under this starlight, will someday be pressed into limestone and lifted far inland. Shells will become ghosts within rock, and the ripple marks of flats will be preserved as delicate ribs in stone that breaks with a sugary sparkle. A walker in a future valley will trace them with a fingertip and feel the old tidal rhythm under a dry sky. The same wedge of dust light will still rise at the day's edges, long after this estuary is silted and the reeds have moved with the water's need. The motif stays: water, light, sand, and patient attention. The same place, folded and refolded through time. Nothing here asks for resolution. The shore's ledger accepts entries written by wind, by reeds, by hands. The heavens continue to offer their steady face, altered only in the slowest ways. Whether any traveller once looked back from the dark and found cause to answer these alignments remains a question kept in the same calm register as the others. It lies like a shallow pool left by the tide, reflective, undisturbed, complete in its stillness. Above it, stars pass and return. Below it, the ocean breathes as a planetary exhale, and the first shores sleep within the long rhythm of the night. On an open upland, where wind moves without hindrance. Stone stands against the sky and learns to carry light. Single pillars lift their weathered faces. Paired uprights hold a span. Low rows run like ribs across the grass. At daybreak, the first rays cast long, cool shadows that creep over scored ground, and by mid-morning those shadows slide into narrow notches and pores. Nothing hurries. Shadow and edge meet as the sun follows its calm arc, and the ground records the meeting like a pulse written in pale dust. A simple truth guides the whole design. The sun does not rise at the same point of the horizon each morning. It wanders northward and southward through the year, touching its outer stations at two far dawns and returning through a middle crossing when day and night balance. Stones answer this slow swing with fixed sight lines. From a central point, a slit or doorway faces the farthest summer rising. Another opening greets the winter return. When the sun reaches those extremes, a beam runs cleanly down a corridor of rock to rest on a marked stone. Within these frames, a second wanderer is noted. The moon does not keep to one narrow path, but overspans longer than many lives. It reaches farther and then less far on the horizon. The widest reach comes and goes in roughly 19 winters, and certain avenues allow a low, pale disk to drift along their length and pause behind a lintel at those rare standstills. Cold light fills an inner chamber like rain gathered in a basin. It is a quiet skill to set a long corridor to receive a traveler that will only touch that niche a few times in a life. Attention settles on the stones themselves. Some faces are roughened to spread light, some are smoothed to drink it. Tiny cupped depressions the width of a thumb hold rain and dew, becoming miniature mirrors at dusk. In the last blue of evening, those mirrors collect a first star and let it tremble upon the surface of pooled sky. By this simple means, a distant lamp is brought down to the level of a hand. An instruction can be given with a fingertip. Earthbound glint and far light lean toward each other until the first bat stitches the air. Air joins the craft. In certain chambers, a low tone sung near a wall returns as a steady murmur. A whisper becomes a soft ribbon that seems to travel the circumference and settle behind the listener. Without giving the method a name, one can say the stones hold sound the way a bowl holds rain, and that breath within is made slow and even by this holding. There is no need to claim that such resonance is meant for messages. It simply shows care for how air moves in confined spaces, as exact in its way as a shadow line. There is mystery too, but it is the gentle kind that does not demand an answer. Across latitudes and seas, structures with similar concerns rise independently. Openings that attend to the longest and shortest days, central courts that receive a noon ray, rings that answer a particular rising or setting. Separated by oceans and many centuries, hands rediscover the same constraints and weave them into stone. Whether this recurrence means the sharing of ideas or merely the universality of sky and time remains an open question. A grounded fact keeps company with the wonder. Leave a vertical pole on open ground and trace its shadow through a day. The curve that results will, when joined at its short noon point, give a true north-south line. From this plain behavior of light and hours, a square can be set to the main directions. From that square, corridors and thresholds can be placed to greet chosen risings. No instrument beyond patience is needed. The horizon is the tool, the sun the marker, and the earth the record. Over seasons, the square holds and the sky answers. Some details within the layouts call for wonder. Stones with a faint stripe of quartz catch dawn with a thread of brightness, so that a watcher sees a quick seam crawl and vanish along a face. Elsewhere, a flat slab is set low, so that the first sun of the shortest day draws a blade of light along its edge and leaves it balanced, neither spilling to one side nor the other. At a moment poised between deepenings of winter, even the shadow of a top stone upon a lower face is used as an inner gnomon, a dark pointer that moves with the day. Interpretations remain soft. Some read these alignments as agricultural instruments, keeping planting and harvest in step with season. Others see them as places where the long rhythms of sky and life are acknowledged together, where beginnings and endings are noted in the company of stone, water, and breath. Some accounts speak of silent lights that pause and drift without wind. One cautious hypothesis imagines observers from elsewhere gathering measurements, using such fixed lines as references from above, then leaving the stones to keep time on their own. Night returns to the upland. The same faint veil first noticed over the estuary rises here as well, a breath along the high air. The wedge of dust light leans after sunset and lifts before dawn, and stones stand within it like ribs under thin skin. In a wind that thins words to murmurs, long shadows climb and withdraw. The intent that linked shore to star now anchors itself in rock. No proclamation is made. The alignments do their work with the unhurried confidence of a tide clock, patient, exact, and composure. In the meantime, the stones keep the day's last warmth, then pass it into the night without comment. The sky, which needs no instruction, continues its slow measure, whether any watcher ever looked down and saw these lines as familiar hints, or whether only human hands traced them out of love for recurrence, remains unsaid. What is said, in the only language the place keeps, is the meeting of beam and edge, the pause of brightness on stone, and the return, year after year, of a morning that tells all things that can be told by light alone. Across an ancient desert, wind draws a thin mark over gravel and lets it go. The plain stretches without tree or river, a skin of dark stones polished by centuries of sun and grit. Each pebble wears a delicate glaze, desert varnish rich in iron and manganese that forms grain by grain in dry air. Beneath that lacquer, the earth is pale, chalky, soft as bone ash. When hands clear the dark crust away, a brighter path appears and holds. Because rain is scarce and the wind crosses evenly, the work is quiet and repetitive. A line is walked until it becomes a thread, then thickened by repeated passage. Stones are rolled a hand's width and left to catch light. Elsewhere, small rocks are set upright like thin teeth, their edges facing dawn so the first light kindles them in order. Many paths are not dug but brushed. The veneer is swept aside with branch and basket, revealing a ribbon that gleams at noon and cools fast at dusk. A grounded fact keeps the figures intact. In hyper-arid regions, surfaces stabilize. The pavement of stones shields finer sediments from being blown away. When that pavement is disturbed, it reforms only slowly, so pale exposures remain for generations. Varnish redeposits atom by atom over long years. Yet the contrast endures. Light showers lift dust and seldom carve. Rare flows follow old channels and spare the high flats. At night, the plains are broad mirrors under the sky. The same wedge of dust light seen on the first shores rises after sunset and before dawn. Under that soft brightness, the paler paths take on a faint gleam, like stitches on cloth lightly raised. The wind falls until only the hiss of sand on stone remains. On certain slopes, a low humming begins when sand avalanches, a tone that holds like breath and fades with stillness. Morning breaks with hard edges, shadows are exact, and straight paths cast straight darks across a light floor. Some lines run farther than an eye can hold, crossing dry gullies on causeways of rolled stones and splitting upon low hills to meet again beyond. Others end in circles, cairns, or small platforms where a person can stand and feel the ruled land unfold as a rhythm of bearings. A pair of parallels runs so true they seem to test the horizon itself. Purposes remain quiet and plural. Paths may guide processions that knit scattered wells and promontories into a single walk. A long straight can serve as a horizon finder, a way to judge whether the air is clear enough to see a mountain 2 days distant. Circles and spokes may parcel the sky at ground level, assigning places to watch particular risings and settings. In a few basins, figures take form, wings stretched, coils unspooled. a geometric body with a single eye. Yet from the earth they are always partial, felt more by steps than by sight. A gentle uncertainty rests over all of it. How did those who laid the paths understand their whole? Nearby foothills allow a vantage, and platforms widen the view. One can imagine kites, light frames rising on evening winds, granting brief looks beyond human height. Or understanding may have gathered through movement alone. Go until the wind turns cool. Turn where the long line meets the ridge. Stop at the circle when the sun leaves the notch. The design may live in legs and breath rather than in a picture. Small, lesser-known details bring the place inward. Tiny snails sleep glued to undersides of pebbles, their shells varnished like the stones. Before sunrise, a thin necklace of moisture forms, where a line crosses a shallow hollow. The night's dew drawn to the pale strip that cools faster than the dark crust. A beetle walks dotted tracks along a border, pauses at a low ridge, then vanishes into the brighter path as cleanly as a word broken between syllables. Scholarly questions remain soft, because care finds many possibilities. Some read these geoglyphs as calendars at ground scale, writing the long movements of sun and moon into distances a person can walk. Others see threads for remembrance, tying sky and stone through processions repeated across generations. A cautious hypothesis attends the notion of watchers beyond the air. If distant observers once swept low over arid plateaus, long straight lines would serve as calibration marks, visible from altitude without needing meaning on the ground. There is restraint in the earth itself. The varnish that gives the desert its dark sheen forms over spans longer than a life. To cut through it is to open a letter that took centuries to write. Restoring that letter takes centuries more. The slowness ensures each path carries commitment compressed into brightness. The marks need not be messages. They are durable acts made possible by dryness. If rains returned in strength, letters would soften and fold back into plainness. Evening comes with the far edge of heat. Warmth stored in stones lifts into air in slow exhalations, like a plane breathing out. The quiet veil glows along the ecliptic, and constellations assume their positions without effort. On the horizon, a low bank of dust lets a bright planet blur and sharpen as the wind changes height. Along a ruled path, small eddies roll off the borders, gathering the day's warmth like beads on invisible strings. In time, dunes will lean and partly cover. Floods will cut new channels. A slow rain of dust will thicken the varnish and dim the contrast. Elsewhere, coastlines slide inward as before, and stones on uplands continue to carry light. The motifs repeat at their scales: shore, ring, and line. Glow on water, beam in corridor, stripe on desert. The same patience that set a notch for midwinter sunrise sets 100 straight paces into pale ground and leaves them for the next wind to read. From above, if anyone above ever looked with a careful eye, the set appears as an economy of intention. Long measures, right angles, arcs deliberate and spare. From the earth, it remains what it has always been, a way to move through openness with assurance, a way to keep company with sky by resembling it on ground. No argument is made, no reply expected. The desert holds its pale writing, and the night presses gently upon it, as constant as breath in a chamber where sound becomes a low, steady tone. Thin air carries the dawn more quickly along a spine of rock. A ridge lifts from the lowlands like a slow wave turned to stone. Its crest serrated with frost-bitten blocks, its flanks stitched with narrow paths that keep to the contour. The valley lies far below river, drawn like a silver thread, terraces small as scales, and the sky spreads with almost no haze. Breath leaves in small white threads that vanish as soon as they form. Here, where cold and light meet without much between them, stone learns a different language. The first stones stand where the wind slips over, not on the very peak where lightning would cleave them, but a little lower on a shoulder that faces the most generous sky. Uprights lean into the prevailing gust, their faces turn to the long sweep of horizon. A span is lifted across two, just enough to frame a notch where the sun will sit for a moment on a certain winter morning. Rims of ice feather the lintel before dawn, and when the edge of light reaches them, they brighten and shed, grain by grain, as though a small snowfall rises instead of falls. A grounded fact holds steady in this thin world. With height, the air lightens and dries. Water vapor thins. Dust and smoke lie mostly in valleys. Scattering lessens. Nights sharpen, stars multiply. A bright planet makes a steadier lamp when it climbs toward the zenith. The same faint veil that glows above coasts and deserts rests here as well, but it shows more cleanly, a delicate band like breath drawn along the sun's path. The ridge seems to touch the place where that band lives, and the stone gaze is arranged to meet it. Freeze and Thor work slowly on the arrangements and become collaborators. In the season of long nights, moisture seeps into hairline cracks, sets, and widens them by a finger's thickness when morning heat returns. Pebbles shuffle upward through the soil, sorting themselves by size into rings and stripes. On a flat bench near the ridge, that sorting lays out pale ovals edged with darker stones without any hand involved. The place learns to decorate itself. Builders note this quiet work and borrow its clarity. They set pale slabs in dark scree, dark markers where the ground is light, trusting the mountain's own tidying to keep the contrast legible year after year. At sunset, the mountain's shadow stretches out, vast and triangular, even when the peak itself is not a true pyramid. The shadow narrows to a point against distant haze, as though the summit touches a far place. On certain evenings, when cloud floats below the ridge and the sun stands behind, a walker's outline projects upon the mist and comes ringed with soft colors. A halo that swells and fades with every breath. The same figure moves when the walker moves, a private double large as a house, made only of light and droplet. This lesser-known gift of angle and vapor persuades many to stand still and study their own silence for a time. The works built here are measured without the need for survey beyond eye and patience. A gap taken from one outcrop to another marks the place where the first light of the longest day slips. A shallow basin in the lee cradles a small pool that receives the noon sun without ripple. Lines of sight climb peak to peak, and along those lines, other high places answer. Smoke from a damp branch taken at the same moment on distant ridges rises and is carried flat by the wind, turning separate points into one slow pulse written across the sky. Night comes early on the crest, but the stars rise as if nearer. A band of pale light threads the darkness, and within it, the dust river bends with a grace that seems to echo the river far below, which swings through its terraces in wider, heavier curves. Frost grows delicate spines on the windward faces of markers and firs, the edges of old footprints until the path looks sown. When the winter moon lifts, sharp shadows step away from low walls and run cleanly to the edge. Sound becomes small. Even spoken names, if anyone uses them, are taken by the flow of air and laid down the slope as a thin line. Purposes gather and remain uninsistent. Planting is far below. The ridge watches time for a country of fields it cannot see. The short seasons of pasture move in obedience to snowline, and meltwater trickles. Some structures hold no chamber, no hearth, no shelter from weather, only framed view and measure. A slot for a rising star at a certain lifetime, a window for the slant of sunset that returns after cycles too long for one pair of eyes to welcome more than once. Why raise frames in such spare places, and why return to tend them? The question is left to the wind as it crosses and makes a uniform sound along the gap. A quiet uncertainty peers farther still. The highlands collect lights of their own lightning, brushing the ridge with pale fingers, brief red veils that lift above distant storms and vanish before they can fully form, pearls of cold fire that sometimes drift and go without leaving scorch. Whether such lights are only the upper air answering to charge and wind, or whether they inspired designs that call to the high reaches in return, remains without answer. One cautious hypothesis, kept in the same calm drawer as others, imagines that if observers ever approached from the dark, they would first read peaks and willfully straight ridgelines as the planet's own beacons. Here, fires would show cleanly, and reflective stone would answer a passing sweep. To live at height is to listen, and the mountain gives its counsel in patient measures. Each day, a wind rises from the valleys when the sun warms slopes, and each night a chill flow descends. These breaths repeat so faithfully that time can be told by their arrival on certain ledges. Snow that lingers in the lee of a boulder tells not only the season but the direction of storms. Old rhyme teaches from which quarter the fiercest air comes. Auroras rarely visit these latitudes, yet now and again a subtle broadening of the night, a low green murmur above the north, announces that the upper sky is restless, though earth below stays composed. Lesser traces accumulate where no feet now go. On a shelf not yet fallen away, lichen maps itself in continents of yellow-green across a marker's sunward face, a soft clock that turns years into patches. Feather ice grows from rock like glass barley in the hour before dawn, and then collapses to invisible water as the sun rounds. A small bird uses the lintels' leeward shadow to preen, and its molt collects in a seam that later readers will find and weigh in the palm, light as promises, old as winter. Beyond the ridge, other ridges answer with their own spare frames, some broken by frost, some newly set where a rockfall cleared a view. The chain continues until the eye tires, and the air softens the far lines into blueness. Intervisible points hold the same motif as shores and deserts, the wish to place the sky into the ground without claiming it. To acknowledge long movements with things that do not move, a beam crossing a corridor, a wedge of dawn gathered in a slot, a stripe of pale earth drawn through dark crust. These return here as stones that simply face a direction and keep the act of facing through all weathers. When storms come, they come as curtains. Cloud climbs the slope in layers. The world reduces to 10 strides of rock. Moisture slants and hisses on the stones. Thunder finds the peak and speaks to it. A scent of struck air spreads. Afterward, the ridge rinses into many threads, each finding its own channel, and small sheets of water turn the carefully placed slabs into mirrors that hold brief skies. The cold returns, ordinary as dusk, and the mirrors go to frost again. If anyone once looked down from beyond the air and sought the simplest declarations of orientation and repeatable measure, these heights would have been the least ambiguous. Lines without trees, angles without parallax from swaying branches, sight that runs from one crest to another as if the mountain were a grammar, or perhaps the ridges are only, and sufficiently, the places where patience meets clearness most readily, where the sky feels direct, and where a hand can lift a stone and, with that lift, be in company with long movements that require little explanation. In the long remainder, plate boundaries stir and lift new chains, while old ones soften and fall into broad hills. The same seabed from the first shores rises somewhere and makes a high pasture. Shells meet thunder as fossils under boots. The wedge of dustlight climbs along ridgelines unchanged. The faint veil still leans across the night, where a lintel once cupped rime and melted to brightness. A broken slab now warms and cools with day and night. Its purpose neither lost nor explained, only absorbed into the mountain's slow practice of wind, frost, and clarity. Fire gathers in a shallow pit where stone, air, and patience meet. Ore sits as dull rock at first, green stains along fractures. Red crust in crumbly seams, black nodules heavy for their size. Charcoal breathes slowly under a cover of clay, and a low wind feeds it through a narrow throat. The heat climbs until the surface of things loosens. What looked like ordinary stone begins to slacken, to sweat, to release a brighter heart. Slag runs as dark syrup into a scoop of sand. A small, luminous bead forms where the hottest breath moves through the bed. Nothing is rushed. The glow deepens by increments, as though night itself were being thickened into metal. A simple truth holds at the center of this change. Ores give up their metal when heat and a careful balance of air ask the oxygen to let go. Charcoal's smoke becomes a patient partner. The flame is not allowed to roar, but to lean and draw. The interior of the pit is kept starved of free breath, while bellows send a measured exhale and pull. Ash falls and blankets the bed. When the hours have lengthened and colors have passed from dull red to yellow to white at the core, small blooms of metal can be teased from the matrix. Hammering consolidates them while they are still warm, pushing out glassy waste. In a place where stones once carried only light and shadow, they now carry metal, which is light that learned to rest in weight. Clay listens and remembers. Nearby, kilns of earth and fieldstone are packed with vessels and tiles, their surfaces smoothed with slips that will take a sheen. The heat hardens bowls to a ring-like stone. If one were to grind a shard to powder centuries from now, and look for the direction in which its smallest grains align, a quiet signature of the planet would be found written into it. The orientation of Earth's field on the day the clay cooled through its last glowing threshold. Fired earth, once soft as riverbank mud, becomes a book of cooled heat, holding a compass that no hand set. Lesser-known gifts occur as byproducts. Plant ash carried by the draft lands upon hot clay and melts with the sand in the slip, flowing to a thin glass that traps a breath bubble and freezes it as a pale eye no larger than a seed. Copper from the hearth fumes greens into glaze where the draft is strongest. Iron from the clay reddens in the richer air near the door and turns brown in the starved back corner. On a windless morning, dew condenses first on a fired vessel and last on a lump of slag. The cooled glass and the uncured earth take and release the night at different rates. Each small surface becomes a clock of breath, a measure of how fast darkness leaves. Metal teaches different lessons. Copper runs willingly when coaxed. Tin, found far from many smelters, turns copper firm and ringing. Lead melts early and moves like a shadow that shines. Iron arrives only grudgingly, as a spongy bloom that must be beaten into itself. When iron sits with charcoal long enough, its skin hardens. The edge it takes holds a memory of the fire that fed it. Some batches turn out with watery patterns that seem to flow under the polish, a result of minute differences locked in during cooling and heat. More than a craft, less than a mystery, a conversation between time and temperature that hands can guide but cannot fully command. Questions remain and stay gentle. How did tin move over such distances to meet copper? How were exacting heats repeatedly found and held without numbers, by ear and by color alone, in open air and earthwork furnaces? Recipes cross water on rafts and in baskets, yet in some places the same ratios appear where no raft could have come. A shard of pale glass with deep blue threads occurs in one field, a token of sand persuaded to melt with plant ash. A similar piece is found beyond a mountain chain that never knew that field. Are these simply the convergences of materials obeying the same laws under the same hands? Or the quiet exchange of techniques along routes so old that their paths are lost beneath later tracks? Other materials stray from the common. A pale, heavy bead with a skin like varnished slate is found nestled near charcoal. Polished, it shows cross-hatched figures that only form when iron and nickel cool with great slowness. Year upon year, in places much colder than any night, sky metal takes a polish other iron cannot, and it resists rust as if it held its chill inside. Tools made from such metal feel rarer than their size allows. The bead is cut and set into wood, not because it is better for work, but because it carries the quiet of long cooling. The hush of space itself, sealed inside a small weight. Along the floors of older hearths, the earth turns to a dark glass where heat tasted sand beyond its usual limit. Puddled black ripples record a draft that bent to one side that day. Trapped within are bubbles stretched like seeds blown in a constant wind. The glass, underfoot, is not an accident so much as the hearth's own writing. A record of temperature held long and calmly enough to change more than awe. Later, readers could shadow their fingertips over those ripples and feel the mind of fire drawn into shape by stone and breath. From these rooms of heat and ash, a broader uncertainty looks outward. It is known that rock can be persuaded to yield bright threads and that sand can be coaxed into clear skin. It is known that fired clay bears a faint compass and that metal takes on textures that recall the path of its cooling. Some speak of lights that do not flicker, of pale beams that linger without smoke, recorded by hands that had words only for sun and moon and fire. A cautious hypothesis keeps its place beside the rest. If observers beyond the air ever paused here, their interest might have fallen upon such transformations: the first long nights with kilns, the first persistent glows where none grew before, the first spectral breaths of metal and glass rising like a thin, steady plume. Durable substances would be their chosen letters. Fired clay to hold a field's direction, sky iron to show a crosshatch only time in cold can draw, copper hardened by tin to ring a clear note in air. Against this thought stands the sufficiency of the earth. Copper ores travel by exchange because the sound of a struck copper blade on oak becomes promised work. Tin meets copper because the alloy behaves so well that it teaches its own value. Ash glazes form because reed and straw burn and fall. Blue is made where a trace element rides into the melt. Brown and green come from the very iron and copper within the clay and the hearth. Iron hardens beside charcoal because carbon learns to live in the metal's lattice at heat and then refuses to leave. No messenger is required beyond flame and patient hands. And yet the products look like messages anyway. Beads of sky metal set where eyes rest. Pale glass casting a cool light. A vessel that rings in a certain key when tapped. Small details tether the scene to the larger world. The same seabed mentioned earlier, now limestone, is ground and added to clay slips to help them melt. Shells burned to powder lend strength to bodies that must span an oven's empty space. The wedge of dust light along the morning sky appears as the kiln is opened, and its colour seems briefly inside the new glaze, before the day's white takes over. In the late evening, the faint veil along the ecliptic rests above rooftops, while the last heat leaves the pit as a slow ascent, a vertical exhale that merges with the steady breath of the upper air. In later ages, the hearth floor will be quarried inadvertently by a ditch. The slag will be lifted and mistaken for stone until its weight and glassy skin correct the hand that thought so. A pot shard will show a ripple where glaze pooled and thinned. The ripple will prove that a pot once faced the draught in a certain way, and the smallest grains inside will tell, if asked, which way the planet's field pointed when the kiln slept. The metal will tarnish to a quiet tone, then stabilize, then wait. If anyone above ever sought simple proofs of thinking life at work here, they would have differed from the long lines carved into desert and ridge only by scale. A thin column of warmth beyond that of an ordinary hearth, repeating night after night under the same sky. A glow persistent in a small place, though the moon is new. The shine of fired earth set to cool in rows like small moons brought to ground. Or perhaps no eye beyond ever watched, and this is sufficient. Earth teaching earth to change form with slowness and care. Light becoming weight, heat becoming memory, clay becoming a field that can be read ages hence. In the quiet after the fire, the coals dim to dull orange, and the night returns to its own steady brightness. The same patient veil, the same path of dust light, rising and falling, as though the planet itself inhales and exhales by the kiln's side. Where continents bend into shelves, the sea keeps a soft memory of older coasts, At the edge of a present beach, waves lift and lay a regular braid of foam. But farther out, beyond the breakers, a long slope lowers into green. There the floor flattens, holds for miles, and then falls again into deep indigo. On that broad, drowned plain, rivers once walked in, wide meanders. Reeds leaned, fires burned low beside sweet water. The world warms after heavy ages of ice, and oceans, patient and unhurried, climb the lowlands by hand-widths, then arm spans, then the height of a grove. Shorelines move inland as if called, and old dunes become bars, old bars become reefs, and forests learn to sleep where mullet now turn. A grounded fact rests beneath these changes. When the heavy ice retreats, seas rise by great measures, and valleys at the continent's edge turn to bays. River mouths widen. Braided channels become pale estuaries drawn like branches beneath clear water. The crust, relieved of its burden, lifts slowly. The ocean continues its spread. This rise is no rush, only a long persuasion. The traces it leaves are careful and durable. Wave-cut benches that now lie in quiet light. Terraces of coral that climb like steps and then slip below. Tree stumps, dark and firm, standing upright in the shallows with roots still clutching mud that once breathed air. At night, the shelf becomes another sky. A thin green veil rests high overhead, the same subtle glow that belongs to lone ridges and desert flats, where internal waves roll through layers of water. Lines of bioluminescence write parallel bands that drift and fade, as if the sea mimics the ruled land beneath it. Marine snow falls in slow weather, flecks and threads descending like winter without chill, settling in bends of old channels that no longer feel wind. On certain evenings, a river of plankton blooms along a density front and lifts a long, silent light, visible to anyone who watches past midnight. A gentle highway that goes nowhere and is gone by dawn. When the tide lowers and the water clears, marks appear that belong to hands. In many coves, low walls of stone reach from shore into the shallows and turn back again, making patient chevrons against the tide. Fish slip over them at flood and hesitate at ebb, and the sea gives up part of its motion. Elsewhere, flat slabs line a sunken lane between faint foundations. A street that once held feet, and now holds small hermit crabs. In a certain bay, piles of cobbles curve like collapsed ribs. In another, straight courses show under the sand for 3 breaths of clear water, and then vanish when grains stir. The seafloor farther out is not featureless. From one horizon to another, a long ridge shoulders up, running under many crossings of latitude. A mountain chain without summit or snow that breathes out heat and builds new crust in small, steady pulses. Where it branches, thin peaks and obsidian fields host pale chimneys that exhale mineral smoke which falls and grows into spires. Life gathers here without sunlight, taking warmth and chemistry in place of light, building delicate gardens in the dark. The ridge advances its slow work whether eyes look or not, and continents ride their rafts outward, restless in ages too large for counting. Lesser-known gifts ride in with the tide. A shelf of beach rock, hardened by minerals carried in warm water, sets like a thin mortar along a strand line and traps impressions with a careful hand. Rush stems, the edge of a woven mat, the pressed oval of a sandal that once stepped on wet sand and was fixed within a season. A stray log, buried in protective sand and later re-exposed by a storm, still bears the faint spiral of a boreworm's passage, a script no one reads, but which holds its own patience. In a lagoon at the edge of a reef terrace, raindrops pit a thin crust during a brief calm, and that stippled skin hardens. Centuries later, lifted by a swell and rolled to a new place, it carries the map of one sudden shower. Mystery gathers quietly where patterns repeat. Across far coasts, stone traps show similar geometries. Splayed arms, keels of cobble, patient funnels, though they belong to cultures that never spoke. Under several bays, right angles endure where the shore now slips, and long piers reach into what is currently deep. Are these convergences of need and material, the simple reuse of what tide and stone allow, or memory carried along coasts that have themselves shifted by days of walking? In channels now touched by brine, timbers lie in neat courses. Some are ancient, their cells filled with minerals, their growth rings still telling of winters when cold pressed harder, and summers when the river was fed by a glacier's far breath. Questions extend to scale. Straight causeways under shallow seas cross from one islet to another, in lines as spare as desert glyphs, visible only when currents rake away the loose sand and daylight stands high and clear. Long breakwaters angle slightly off true, and meet a missing shore, as if to shelter a basin that no longer exists. In one bay, a ring of posts encloses a circle of calmer water that briefly holds the moon's path like a string of white coins. In another, flat tabs of rock articulate a harbour mouth exactly as the wind rose would suggest. Their reasons are as plausible as the needs of boats and salt and fish. The sense that they speak a second language to the sky is only a whisper left by straightness in a moving element. A cautious hypothesis, set beside others in the same quiet tone, imagines that if watchers from beyond air ever traced the planet's edge, coastlines would have served as their first unbroken lines, bright foam bands by day, silver threads by night. Shelves would appear as pale shelves indeed, wide tables before the plunge. Long, human-made lines, fish, weirs, causeways, piers would become incidental scales beside larger measure, useful in their very regularity as checks upon speed and height. If such a mapping ever occurred, it would favour calm repetition. The same passes, the same bays, evenings, when the wedge of dustlight leans and outlines the curve of the world. Proof is neither offered nor needed. The thought rests like an untroubled buoy, moving but anchored. Against it stands sufficiency again. What is found beneath these waters often needs no helper beyond tide, stone, and patience. People place rocks where the sea moves and learn to harvest motion. They straighten a foreshore and calm a cove because fish and small boats require it. They pave a lane because feet and wheels prefer it. When the sea rises, the works persist for a while in brackish shallows and then go quiet under clear water. Currents discover them and write their own script across them. Sand waves that migrate like herds, ribbons of eelgrass that bow and straighten in place, eddies that lift silt and let it fall in rounded tongues. Evidence keeps its manners. In one inlet, a peat bed capped by marine mud holds pollen from marsh flowers that grew when the shore stood a long walk seaward. Cut into it is a channel that later became a tidal creek, then a dredged fairway, then a silted reach where only mullet flicker in a warm eddy. On another coast, stacked coral terraces step inland like careful stairs, each riser a pause in the ocean's climb, each tread a season of living limestone under a different sky. Elsewhere, wave-cut notches on limestone cliffs align at the same height along many miles, a faint ring drawn by the ocean's patient hand, and then lifted above spray by the land's slow rising. All of these make quiet maps that can be read long after the cartographer is gone. The same motifs continue to return. The faint veil of night bows over the water as over the ridge and desert. The dust-light wedge leans before dawn across the calm horizon and lays a path that seems walkable were one light enough. A drowned forest stands in a bay, its stumps as black as night and as firm to the hand as living roots, while small fish play among them and write a new grammar in the same room. A carved stone, set to mark a rising in an older age, rests now on a seafloor of bright sand, and at a certain season the sun sends a sheet of light along that sand, so the stone's shadow briefly touches what it once faced, as if the world kept faith with itself, even in translation. In the far future, this shelf will tilt. Parts will lift into warm hills, Others will slip under the long slope toward deep green. The old river, expressed in rock, will bend through a field where wheat shivers in heat. And someone will find a cobbled line that goes from nowhere to nowhere and wonder what it joined. The ridge in the deep will still build its dark gardens, and continents will still ride forward. Here at the present edge, gentle waves lay a lace that changes with every breath. And under them, the quiet maps wait lined in stone and coral, and drowned wood complete in their patience, neither reaching upward nor asking to be read, content to be the planet's own handwriting in water and light. In warm lowlands, where rivers slow and fields lie as woven mats of green, stone rises into careful shapes that keep company with light. Walls lift first as lines upon lines, then resolve into courtyards squared to the world's steadiness. Columns are set so that shadow will step from one to the next in even measure. Noon to dusk, season to season. A stair climbs at a grade that feels like breath taken slowly while carrying water. A terrace spreads as a calm plain where the dawn can lie down. The place builds itself out of patience. Level upon level of cool shade. Openings that face the horizon, as if it were a visiting relative. Thresholds that hold the moment when dark yields its last. Here, geometry becomes a form of air. Builders set out rectangles whose sides keep a relationship that pleases both eye and load. A long edge and a short edge that answer one another. A diagonal that closes the conversation. A room repeats this rectangle, then doubles it end to end, then halves it for a four-room, so the sequence of entering and pausing follows the sequence of lengths. A raised platform mirrors the plan below at a smaller scale. A basin within mirrors the platform at smaller still. The whole becomes a stack of likenesses, each quieter than the last, retelling the same proportions until the eye forgets that it is counting. A grounded fact rests in the foundations. Across lands that never trade words, large works tend to face the main directions. Their long axes attend closely to east and west. Their corners show north with a fidelity that lies within a fraction of a breath's width over a long wall. The sun's path gives this order. The horizon confirms it. And over time, such alignments allow days of special light to thread the deepest corridors with precision. At a certain morning, a blade of brightness crosses a floor and finds a mark that was waiting since the stones were first set. At another evening, a square of sun sits upon a slab as exactly as a seal. The craft draws on small tools dressed as elements. A string tightens until it hums, then slackens until the hum becomes a whisper. The straightness held in that quiet is transferred to a course of stone. Water steadies in a tray and reveals level with a line that is not a line but a plane. The plane is taut to the terrace. A plum weight flickers like a dragonfly in a breeze and then holds. At that stillness, a pier meets the earth. Though the words are not written here, the methods speak plainly. Gravity, tension, reflection, and the patience to stand beside them until they answer. Lesser-known gifts collect in corners. A polished threshold acquires a thin wax from years of plant resins. Under the morning glaze, a visitor can see the ghost of clouds pooled in that sheen, and moving as if a small weather lives inside the stone. Swifts knit their paths beneath eaves. Their flights map invisible volumes, returning each dusk to stitch the air shut. In the hour before dawn, dew draws itself into a continuous bead along a particular course of joints, because those joints cool slightly faster than the faces they divide. When the first light touches, the bead breaks into a field of points that shimmer like a small constellation fallen to floor level. The temples speak in numbers kept low. Steps count the same across a face and again within a recess. Columns resolve into 4s and 9s. Small rooms echo large ones with halves and quarters. The body learns this cadence without words. Feet take equal lengths. Lungs time the climb. The eye rests at the same distances where it rested before. Though the system is spare, it gives a sensation of understanding the place on first meeting it of having already walked the measure that the stone prefers. Questions remain and hold their composure. Similar ratios and orientations repeat across oceans and ages. Is it only because the sky is the same everywhere and right angles make strong promises? Or did measures travel along roads now eroded into river, telling their lengths to each new mouth? Does a rectangle that solves both structure and sight feel inevitable because bodies share needs? Or because memory moves with pots and seeds and then forgets it moved? The inquiry is without demand. It lies like a cool room in the heat of a day, open to cross breezes, untroubled whether anyone enters to sit. Sound keeps its own geometry. A long hall mutes steps to a felt rhythm. A side chamber sustains a low breath as if it had a throat. Under a dome, a whisper settles at the center and does not need to go farther. The places of least echo often hold offerings of grain or water because quiet asks for quiet around it. A beam of light and a pool of silence meet at noon in the season, when the sun stands highest. No name is needed for the meeting. It simply happens and is counted among the returning events. Under this calm, stone remembers heat in the fine way fired earth does. Sun on a southern face warms the bulk, and the warmth moves inward with a delay that afternoon mistakes for its own. After sunset, the wall gives back this saved day slow, even, and enough to keep night from entering too quickly. In the deepest court, jasmine or a night-blooming vine opens to it, using the small stored summer exhaled by masonry to time a fragrance. Bees work in the cool morning and rest in the upper shade when the sun grows high. Their comb sets out its hexagons regardless, a geometry that needs neither temple nor field to justify itself. Mystery endures in the way distances are persuaded to agree. A courtyard is twice as long as a room is wide, and that room is twice a passage. On certain days, a single ray threads them all, as if the numbers had been chosen to let light run. Yet no single measure is written into the stones other than their spacing, and no instrument beyond chord and basin is required. The convergence of simple means and exact returns feels like a conversation between dust and intention. Whether the conversation begins in clay or in the eye is not decided. It may not need deciding. A cautious hypothesis finds a small place at the margin of this calm. If observers from elsewhere ever sought repeated, intelligible signs upon the surface, they would have found in such precincts a language of consistencies. Axes aligned to the world's turn, nested likenesses that scale predictably, light traps that announce the long year's corners. From altitude, a compound that stacks rectangles in fixed ratios and faces the same directions across far lands would read like a reliable notation, a stable grid against which to test the planet's small wobbles and the precision of a path. Whether any such reading ever occurred remains unproved and, here, unurgent. The buildings keep their own reasons, close reasons that include shade, precession, the governance of water, and the wish to borrow the sky's order. Against that speculation stands a sufficiency that feels complete, the human need for coolness and wayfinding, for assemblies that gather the living and remember the gone, for a measured quiet in which the day's center can be felt. These are enough to raise geometry from dust. The ratios that comfort the eye also distribute weight. The orientations that please the morning also ease the tracking of seasons. The nested likenesses that create coherence also give builders a grammar that any hand can extend. If another gazer ever found these patterns from the air, it would be because they are already strong reasons on the ground. Evening enters with dignity. The long axes saturate with level light, and shadows equal the walls they fall from. Swifts spool into a high hole. The faint veil lifts along the western sky, as it has over shore and desert and ridge, and the wedge of dust light prepares its incline for dawn. Lamps show in the lower porticos, not the steady beams that will later confound certain reports, only common flame sheltered against a draught. The courtyards cool, and then, give back a little stored warmth. The air breathes in a slow, even exchange from garden to room and back again. In that breathing, the place confirms its purpose: to hold time without grasping it, to shape light without forcing it, to let the world's measures become habitable, one square stone at a time. At the edge of weather, light learns to gather without flame. Storm air thickens, and the world's charge divides itself cloud and ground, holding different tempers, the space between them ripening. Points and edges, masts, reeds, spears of grass, temple finials become places where the field pulls tight. A pale, steady glow lifts from those tips and hums. It does not flutter like wick and smoke. It holds to form, a small envelope of quiet fire that will not blacken stone or char wood. This is not miracle but behavior. In strong electric fields, the air itself begins to conduct along sharp points, and a crown of light, cold, blue, persistent rides there, as if the sky had lowered to perch on edges. Over water, the glow comes in pairs at a ship's twin masts and in a bead along the rail. Over salt marsh, it threads the dry spikes of rushes and makes each a thin lantern. High on a ridge, it rests on a cairn's smallest chips, while the larger blocks remain dark. The sound, if any, is a dry whisper, a fricative like grass rubbing against itself. When the field eases, the light withdraws without ash. All that remains is the regular rain and the smell that follows it, stone rinsed to its simplest scent. In many places, hands have recorded a memory of such light as not like flame, without smoke, resisting wind. In every place, the air explains itself by holding a shape for a moment and then becoming its own transparency again. Other steady glows belong to water and decay. On certain nights in summer, lowlands exhale gases raised from slow, wet chemistry, where the ground breathes a mixture rich in compounds born of rot. Tiny flames sometimes lift at a fingertip's height and hover, as if the marsh asked the night to hold a necklace of cool fire. The light answers poorly to gusts. It stands or drifts, and then goes out without ember or trace. Whether this glow is true flame in brief chemical bloom, or a trick of ionized air urged by unseen charge, remains a gentle uncertainty, held quietly by those who study such ground. The effect is the same, a small, patient light that belongs to mud and time. The sea keeps its own continuous brightness. In warm currents, organisms make light when stirred. A wake becomes a comet's tail. A wave's collapse becomes a moving seam of green. On rare, windless nights, whole bays lean toward luminosity, not as sparks, but as a wide sheet of breath. A swimmer passes and leaves a corridor of pale stars that gather and vanish. The glow is work, not fire. It comes from cells that choose under pressure, under threat, under the slow mathematics of their enzymes to let stored energy go as blue. At depth, other lives glow without reference to the moon or boat or swimmer, making their own constellations where sunlight never enters, asking no witness from above. Above, higher than storm height, the night sustains a soft, planet-wide radiance. Even on moonless evenings, when every lamp is capped, the upper air keeps a thin green sheen to itself. It comes from atoms and molecules that, struck in daylight and left in a certain state, return their energy slowly, so the sky never goes entirely dark. Close to dawn and dusk, a broad wedge of faint light climbs along the sun's path, dust in space taking the day farther than the horizon allows. Opposite the sun at midnight, a dim round brightening sometimes appears, where scattered light meets itself again. These are old companions, requiring no tail to travel with us. Air glow and dust light, that keep faith with themselves, even when the ground goes quiet. There are lights the ground gives by pressure alone. In quarries and riverbeds, a blow on quartz sometimes produces a pin flash, a chip answering with blue for an instant when it cleaves. Sugar, crushed in the dark, speaks in pale sparks inside a mouth that knows to look. Linen, torn briskly under winter air, gives a thread-like glow that vanishes faster than breath. Rock holds charges in its lattice. Strain persuades them to travel. Where they meet air, small crowns may appear along fracture rims or cliff edges. That is one explanation, though the family of such lights remains a soft puzzle. Reports speak of steady domes over a valley floor before a tremor comes, or quiet sheets that lift along a fault at dusk and then die when the earth has finished moving. Whether these are electrical corollaries to the rock's stress, or some other communion between stone and sky, remains under gentle debate. In caves and damp woods, light becomes patient work again. Certain fungi feed on fallen wood and convert their labor into a constant, pale emission. A log becomes a slow lantern, not hot, not flickering, enough to be seen after eyes have softened to the dark. In tunnels where air is sweet with humus, small points glow on old timber braces like embers in reverse. In some seasons, insects script luminous trails above still water. In others, the water itself holds a long, low gleam, where dissolved matter answers to ultraviolet from the evening. None of this is sudden, all of it is steady. The earth keeps modest lamps in many rooms. A grounded fact waits inside stone as well. Certain clear crystals split light in two, and let an attentive mind judge the sky's polarization, how the day's brightness quietly arranges itself across the dome. With practice, one can find the sun through cloud, by the way that pattern lies over the horizon. Such cold optics need no lens, only a steady hand and the habit of looking. Whether such crystals were ever used in a systematic way across wide seaways is uncertain, but their capacity to reveal the sky's order rests in the mineral regardless, a property written into the lattice, available to any era that notices. Lesser-known gifts accompany these glows. On some winter nights at high latitude, a belt of the night's green fire softer than tail, firmer than dream, runs like a low river from west to east, then stands, then ripples in slow curtains. Beneath it, snow records that light in no traceable way, yet eyes that have watched it carry the memory like warmth. High above storm anvils, quick geysers of red light reach towards space and vanish before a blink finishes. Far below, beneath thunderheads, faint blue cones drop toward the ground and end without sound. The upper air hosts its own transient handwriting, visible only when the dusk is just right and someone happens to look with the right patience. Questions accumulate, and they keep their calm. Ancient accounts from distant lands speak of beams that hold steady without smoke, of globes that drift without ash, of thin sheets of brightness that pour from the tops of poles. Which of these were corona glows lifted by charged air? Which were misread meteors or distant lightning? Which were the cool fires of marsh and fungus kept in a room too dark for today's lamps to enter? And which, if any, were something else entirely? The answers are likely plural. The night offers many ways to be constant without wick. A cautious hypothesis sits beside the others. If eyes from beyond the air ever wished to demonstrate a presence with minimal means, or to pass notes across a gulf without changing the land, they might favor the same stable behaviors that the world already rehearses. Electric crowns perched on points, steady sheets laid over marsh, cold glows coaxed from chemistry in a vessel set to breathe for a while, beams guided by the air's own taste for discharge along invisible paths. Such signs would be legible to watchers who knew storm and fungus and dust light well enough to hear a difference. Yet they would leave little behind. The hypothesis remains content to be one more small lamp on a long shelf. Against it stands sufficiency. The planet already writes with a steady hand. Charge divides and recombines with grace. Living cells edit darkness with blue. What the ancients note as light that does not flicker may be the world showing its quiet alphabet. Corona, cold flame, slow chemistry. Even the stone remembers in light-fired clay, holding the day's field as a permanent turning, while metal from the sky keeps, in its cross-hatched heart, the tidy print of cooling too patient for any furnace to mimic. The motif returns and ties these rooms together. The same wedge of dust-light that rises over coasts leans now above rivers where willow lights travel. The faint green veil that curved over the first shores rests as gently above highland cairns crowned in blue discharge. In caves where fungi glow, a drip writes a slow, pale point on stone that will be a stalactite in ages. The seabed that will someday lift into a sunlit ridge already knows the constant light of hydrothermal gardens that never see dawn. Everywhere, steady brightness lives as if the planet were practicing a script of soft lamps for any who care to walk by them. When the storm dissipates, the crowns retire to memory. When the marsh cools, the small flames go. When the night ends, the upper sheen returns to day's invisibility. The record remains in hands and eyes, and, sometimes, in stone taught to carry a trace. Whether another attention ever shared these exercises is less important than the fact that they belong to Earth first. Light arrives here in many ways that do not tremble. It holds long enough for a watcher to breathe with it, and then it returns to quiet, leaving the world with the same slow pulse that moves through tide, clay, ridge, and field. On canyon walls where wind keeps the faces clean, the sky is taught to stone. Panels of dark varnish hold engravings that catch the slanting light, and the figures wake as the sun lowers and shadows sharpen. Discs hover among deer and rivers, circles enclose dots, sprigs of radiance run from round forms like quiet hair. In nearby shelters, ceilings blackened by long fires cradle a red field that endures earth. Rubbed, thin, and blown from the mouth, so dust clings to the rock's faint skin. The room smells of mineral and ash. A drip marks time in a shallow dish, and a single moth folds itself into a seam as daylight becomes amber. A grounded fact rests in pigment and crust. Red survives because iron in the earth binds to oxygen and will not let it go. The color becomes a mineral, living against the stone. Black endures because manganese darkens the desert glaze, and because charcoal baked in dry air resists rain. Over long seasons, thin coats laid down by slow drips seal the marks, calcite sheets white as milk, crystal on crystal, year upon patient year. When a wall wets and dries, the crust closes over the image and holds it. The same slow chemistry that hangs stone from cave ceilings also learns to keep a disc on a canyon face. Lesser signs gather around the larger figures. Thumb-sized hollows cupules pucker the rock in constellations of their own, arranged in gently curving chains whose meaning stays uninsistent. Negative hands appear as breath made visible, pigment blown around a resting palm so absence becomes the picture. Rows of dots march beside a radiant wheel and then vanish at a crack that once took a fern and now takes a lizard's shade. On one panel, a faint ring overlaps an older ring with a slight offset, as if a memory were traced twice after the sky had shifted by a finger's width. At twilight, the carvings brighten, not in color but in relief. Engravings cut through the dark glaze and reveal the paler rock beneath. When the sun grazes low, each groove becomes a tiny cliff with its own shade and its own blaze. The same wedge of dustlight that leans above coasts glows now along the canyon's throat, and for an hour the panels hold both day and night at once. Bats stitch the air. The river whispers its old measures against stones that once lay in surf. A surface in darkness and a surface in light touch along the line of a circle, and the circle looks newly made. Purpose keeps its modesty. Wheels and discs may honor the sun that returns, or the moon that lifts from different places across months, or the halos that sometimes crown them when high air grows crystals. Circles with tails may remember a long star that moved and slowly went. Concentric rings may be ponds under a cloudless noon. Round bodies with short rays may be living things seen from above. A tortoise on a bare flat, a lily pool viewed from a cliff. The repertory allows more than one reading, the way a bend in a river can be both a crossing and a boundary without choosing. A soft uncertainty belongs to the arrangement of certain panels. In distant valleys that never traded baskets or words, similar round forms with outward ticks appear among similar companions. Ladders, grids, nested arcs. Are these convergences born of common sky and common earth, the way straight lines and right angles arise wherever long walls meet? Or did measures follow rivers, carried in story the way embers ride in a pot of dust, crossing ranges and being set again in another canyon? The question remains in the same tone as the engravings, present, exact, and content to endure without reply. Stone records more than images. Soot layers from many fires lie like black paper along a shelter ceiling, each sheet a season, each season a weather. Where a flame licked, mineral grew and turned shine to matte. Where a winter smoked, a grey veil fell and kept. In a dry room, the last breath from a torch left a brown fan that still holds the motion of the hand that carried it. On the floor, flakes of old crust show edges that catch light as if packed with tiny prisms. Snap one between finger and thumb, in thought alone, and imagine the small crack of decades breaking. Then imagine new crystal beginning again at the break. A grounded fact in the sky links quietly to the round forms. The planet's axis slowly draws a circle among the stars. Over long ages, night patterns drift against fixed marks. A ring that once held a bright point would fail it centuries later. A notch that once cupped a rising would miss a line. Where an engraved cluster matches a sky no longer seen, time is written twice, once in stone and once above. This pairing needs no instrument beyond careful attention, yet it allows a calm calibration. The carving becomes an unhurried witness to the sky's slow turning. Lesser-known gifts cling to pigment and rock. Fine crystals grow on charcoal lines and guess the humidity of long winters. Wasps build paper cells against a red field and add their hexagons to the human geometry. Tiny white threads of gypsum bloom where a figure breathes at a seam, then fall to powder when noon heat returns. An owl sleeps on a ledge and drops a neat grey pellet. Crushed, it releases the small bones of things that find their own shapes in the lightless hours. A spider ties a web from ochre to ochre, and at dawn the web catches the whole panel as a single, trembling lens. Not every circle is a light. Shields have round hearts. Grinding hollows are circles, opened slowly by grain and elbow. Water leaves eyes in the rock where it turns, polishing bowls within bowls that shine when the sun strikes them. Yet among these bodies are discs drawn too high to be basins, too thin-lined to be grinding cups, too radiant to be cover and tool. A few include inward spirals that turn against the shell's habit. A few hold dots placed like seeds in a careful grid. The mix is not a riddle to solve, only a ledger of what the hand found worth tracing. Mystery keeps its composure. Old accounts from far places tell of circles edged with pale flame that passed without sound. Others speak of globes that lingered as long as a prayer and then moved. A safe reading points to known behaviors. Halos that ring the sun or moon when high ice arranges itself in plates and pillars. Twin mock suns that flank the real one. Meteors that break and leave round. Brief ghosts. The flowered corona that blooms around flame in damp air. Some panels may keep such weather. Some may borrow a river's round mouth or a lake seen from a ridge. The ground offers much that is circular without asking for marvels. A cautious hypothesis takes one more seat on the long bench. If observers ever came from outside the air and wished to be seen by those who already knew the sky's customs well, they might prefer the round and steady over the jagged and quick discs that neither smoke nor scorch, spheres that hover and leave no ash, lights that withstand wind as storm crowns do, beams that settle on canyon rims as sun sheets settle on temple floors. They might allow their shapes to resemble the familiar so the figure could be read without words. The thought remains in its place, offered without demand. Against such conjecture stands sufficiency. The sun is circular to the eye. The moon keeps her roundness even when thin. Pools are round by habit, where no corner tells them otherwise. Rock resists in curved fractures. Baskets tighten into circles when rims are drawn evenly. Hands, when they turn in air to mark the center of a place, make a ring because the wrist prefers it. Circles may be only what the world and the body most easily agree to draw together. That answer feels complete and does not unsettle the rest. Night returns, and with it the usual companions. The faint green veil reappears above the canyon's cut. The wedge of dust-light climbs on each side of midnight and pauses near dawn. A long star walks once and is gone. In the shelter, glowworms take the ceiling's edges as a small constellation. A drip counts a steady measure into a shallow pool that holds a perfect disk of reflected day. The same limestone born as seabed, folded and raised, receives red breath and black line, then closes over them, grain by grain, with a thin skin of stone. The panel sleeps in that slow covering, the circle still clear, the meaning still quiet, the sky still near. The night opens along the great river of stars, and a single bright stranger begins to move against the patient pattern. It rises near the sun's road and lengthens as days pass, a pale plume that leans away from daylight as if the day itself were a wind. The tail does not point where the visitor travels, but where the light presses. It streams from the body like frost unspooled in space. Each evening the stranger stands in a new place, and each dawn it climbs closer to the horizon that holds the wedge of dust light like a soft stare. Some who keep memory say it has come before, that a long account of winters matches its returns, that this is not a first occurrence but a patient interval kept. A grounded fact keeps this poise free of demand. Small, cold bodies travel on long ovals around the Sunday. Near warmth, they release gas and dust. Sunlight pushes that dust into a plume that always points away from the star. Their arcs can take lifetimes to complete. Pieces that separate along the path spread into a filament of particles, and in a measured year, the Earth intersects that filament again and again. Where the trail is thick, the sky writes with brief white strokes. Where it is thin, a few points scratch and vanish. The year thus receives dates when a shower arrives with a clock's confidence, old as fields and as reliable as bees returning to the same comb. On such nights, the air above the deserts and shores receives many small entries. A grain meets atmosphere, and the glow is not in the grain but in the heated air that curls around it. Some leave a long, faintly green wake that lingers like breath on cool glass, twisting in upper winds until it fades. Others drift almost parallel to the ground and go on, skipping back to darkness with nothing left behind but a weakening thread. Rare ones come bright enough to cast a moving shadow along a wall in a courtyard, or to silver the dark skin of a river for a heartbeat. Eyes that know the quiet veil and the dust-light wedge learn these smaller manners of light and understand that they belong to the ordinary order of night. Lesser-known gifts scatter from these passages long after their flares go. Dust from many breathings of the sky settles into the high atmosphere, and there, at the edge of day, ice finds it and grows shining clouds like delicate fish scales. They float higher than weather, visible in the hour when the sun sits below the horizon and still finds that pale plank. In quieter air closer to ground, small glassy spheres lie where ancient showers fell through storm beads, no bigger than seeds, melted and thrown into shape, carried by rain, sleeping in soils that record a long season's chemistry. Picked up much later and held against light. They show a rind and a heart. Tiny planets made in an instant and then left to rest. The path of a long star can pass through more than sky. In some broad basins far from any volcano, fields of pale glass appear, where sand once lay unremarkable. The surface is fused, as if a great heat touched it without standing there. A sheet of bottle green or honey pale that bears flow lines like frozen wind. This, too, allows a calm reading. Rare fire in the air can turn ground to glass, whether by a burst that does not reach Earth, or by a body that arrives with enough speed to share its heat widely. The glass keeps the memory without shouting it. It lies under dust like a manuscript folded and put away, readable when patience asks. In wood, older than cities, rings from certain years keep a faint extra weight of the sky. The growth of a single season holds more of what the sun's high air sends to ground, as if the planet received a brief, unseen shower, not of light, but of particles that touch atoms and make a clearer stamp. No drama is required. The tree grows as usual, but the chemistry preserves the event, a thin line of emphasis among thousands of unremarked lines, taken together across many trunks and far places. Such lines suggest seasons when the upper air brightened briefly with energy beyond ordinary storms, and from those seasons, accounts of uncommon auroras sometimes remain low, pale rivers of night seen where such rivers seldom run, across lands that never shared a plough. Stories remember moments when the sky changed its habits, long stars that came and went, bright nights when small suns seemed to fall, slow bodies that drifted and left no smoke. A quiet uncertainty holds the idea that such nights aligned with new measures on the ground, fresh care in stone, new spans set to the horizon, different ratios in rooms. Perhaps coincidence gathers in memory the way dew gathers on a favored ledge. Perhaps a visitor's return gave a slow people the confidence to reset their calendars in a new key. Perhaps it is only that attention, once given, deepens, that after a season of bright visitors more people watch the ordinary sky and set their alignments in a finer way. Temples and rings and desert lines answer regardless. Corridors already placed for the sun receive the long star as it passes. Hill notches catch it by event rather than plan. In years, when the earth meets the dust of its path, showers seem to rise from the same place in the constellation map. A gentle illusion of origin, called a radiant, that moves only with the season. A hallway whose axis follows the sun's road therefore also receives these briefings of fire, and a courtyard that frames early evening in autumn inherits the white glyphs easily. It is enough that the sky keeps more than one clock, and that one careful frame can catch several at once. Elsewhere, in quiet marshes and along upland ridges, watchers keep patient lists without writing them down. On certain dates, streaks cross at a rate that changes the sensation of night. On certain other dates, nothing unusual happens. Over years, stones may be moved a hand's width to keep faith with a morning star that has drifted. In the same years, those who tend the place remember that a few evenings in a given month always bring more falling lights, and they time their walks to those intervals. The habit requires no claim and produces no record beyond the steadiness of bodies in the dark at proper hours. A cautious hypothesis finds its place among these facts and uncertainties. If travelers ever approached from beyond the air and wished to be present without standing out, they might move when the sky already expects motion, along the very arcs it has written for itself. Arrivals during showers would hide among the many brief burnings. Slow glides along the sun's road would read as long stars returning. Pauses near the balance points, where pulls cancel, would look like stubborn wanderers at rest. If any such awareness met the ground, it would leave little more than an increase in attention. More faces tilted upward, more care with lines and thresholds, more rooms that borrow the sky's measures with precision and let them go. Against that thought stands a sufficiency that covers the ground thoroughly. The returns of bright bodies are explained by the simple geometry of orbits. The showers arrive because Earth keeps to its own path and crosses old dust. The lingering brightness of a meteor's trail is the upper atmosphere cooling back to what it was. The higher-than-weather clouds are ice on the finest grit the sky can supply. Glass in deserts speaks of heat born in the air. Rings in wood mark out seasons when the sun stirred with unusual vigor. The patterns need nothing beyond their own causes, and the causes belong to the same steady universe that lets rivers bend, that folds seabeds into ridges, that prints a direction into fired clay. The motif returns as if the world insisted on an easy rhyme. The faint green veil holds over the night, as it has in every section of this long room. The wedge of dust light leans like a path the visitor prefers. The same seabed that will rise into a mountain keeps, in its limestone, the memory of algae that once grew under light, untroubled by long stars. The same alignments that let a winter beam find a mark receive, by chance and grace, the slow comet's head in the same frame. In the canyon where discs are carved, a persistent meteor train curls subtly as the upper wind turns it. And for a minute, the stone seems to breathe with the sky. When dawn comes, the visitor's plume thins until it is more wish than thing. Dust spreads along the sun's road to be released again as a rain of brief writings in another year. On fields and beaches and mountain shoulders, the watchers return to their quiet works: harvest, net, stone, cord, clay, keeping in their bodies the habit of looking up at the hours when the sky proves most instructive. Whether any mind beyond the air ever used those hours for company remains an even, patient question, left on the sill like a bowl of clear water. Above it, day climbs with its measured pace, and the world returns to the slow breath heard at every shore. Wind slides down the white plateau in a slow, persistent fall, and snow learns to become stone. Flakes compact into grain, grain kneads into fern, fern presses into ice that takes on a faint blue where old air is trapped and held. The surface looks simple, an undulation of brightness without tree or wall. Yet beneath it, the continent keeps a hidden landscape of mountains, valleys, and old riverbeds, all asleep under a weight measured in ages. Crevasses open and close like careful mouths. Sastrugi wind-carved ridges run like script across the plain. In the coldest hours, diamond dust drifts from a clear sky, glittering without cloud. A snowfall made not by storm, but by air itself, becoming crystal and letting go. A grounded fact keeps its steadiness here. Radio waves pass through ice and return from stone and water. Sent downward from sled or aircraft, the pulses echo from layer upon layer of snowfall turned to ice, then from the buried bed. Those echoes make a picture of what cannot be seen. Folded mountain chains sealed beneath miles of ice. Basins where liquid water lies in darkness. Long troughs cut by rivers that once ran free and now serve as hidden roads for ice to slide. The continent under the ice is not a flat table, but a rough country. The sheet above it creeps outward under its own great weight, slowed or quickened by what it crosses. Lesser-known gifts line the frozen edges. On young sea ice in the first hard nights, frost flowers bloom feathered crystals rising from a skin of brine, so delicate that breath can undo them. They stand in fields that glow weakly at low sun, like a pale garden. Along certain blue ice areas on the plateau, steady winds scour snow away faster than it falls and bring old ice to the surface. There, small dark stones stud the field. Many of those stones are messengers from space, collected by the ice and delivered slowly across centuries to the same natural shelf. A hand can pick them from the white as from sifted flour, pieces of cold metal and rock that kept their paths long before the ice began. The continent's motion writes its own slow story, where ice meets rock with grit between. The bed is planed and grooved. Where a highland lies buried, ice drapes and flows around it like a heavy cloth, setting eddies downstream and bands upstream that keep their shape for long distances. Lakes form where pressure lowers ice's melting point or where warmth rises from the stone. Canals drain those lakes to the sea on schedules measured in unseen pulses. A river under the ice is not a river in the open. It slides along in darkness, its ceiling moving, its bed locked into winter forever. Yet it keeps a rhythm, far away. Floating ice shelves rise and fall gently as those hidden pulses pass beneath. At the surface, light performs patient work. The sun circles low for weeks and then fails to rise at all. Later it returns, slow as a tide. Halos widen around it when the air grows thin plates and columns of ice aloft, and bright companions stand on each side when the crystals turn the right way. By night, the sky sustains its own steady glow, a faint green sheen that belongs to the upper air, even when the world is otherwise black. A quiet river that bends with the planet's magnetic temper and falls in curtains when particles rain from space. On certain summer nights of deep cold, high clouds polish themselves to an iridescent film that seems to belong more to dawn than to day. A skin of light that brightens and fades before anyone fully names it. Purpose remains calm and practical. Camps align their lines to wind, to shade, to the sun's slow track. Markers rise to guide a path home when the horizon loses its contrasts. Those who map the hidden ground lay out transects that repeat year after year, so the buried lakes can be heard filling and emptying, and the moving ice can be felt to quicken or slow. Inlets along the coast freeze and open according to the sea's breath. Polinia stretches of open water kept clear by wind and current smoke in the low light, and feed air with warmth that does not travel far. Nothing calls for drama. The continent's practice is repetition and measure. Mystery keeps company with the echoes. A whole mountain range sleeps under one of the thickest parts of the ice, and appears on the record as a set of bright spines and shadowed valleys. Almost alpine, almost new, though the ceiling above them is ancient. Their presence asks quiet questions about when and why snow gathered there until it buried a country of rock. A broad, circular, low in another region tempts some to imagine a very old wound. Others see only normal depression under a long load. Under parts of the coast, a soft bed of sediment lets ice stream forward like a slow river. In other places, the base is hard and the flow holds back. The reasons for these contrasts remain gentle puzzles, approached with patience equal to the world that holds them. The ice remembers climate in thin lines that curve and sway, layers like pages that thicken toward the present. In tall cores lifted from the plateau, air from older skies sits in beads within the ice, tiny fossils of atmosphere that say, without voice, how the planet breathed when forests stood where deserts now lie. Ash from far volcanoes marks certain years in sudden stripes. Sea salt rises in bands that match forgotten storms. Even the slightest dust held in winter layers, whispers of dry seasons elsewhere, carried here along high paths to fall and sleep. The sheet is a library bound in cold, and its volumes turn slowly as the surface flows toward the sea. Lesser-known quiets occur in the coldest calm. On polar night under new moon, the faint wedge of dust light is low but present, a hint along the horizon, where the sun's path runs beneath the edge of the world. In the thick stillness, one can hear snow grains tick as they drift and stop. In dry air, cloth crackles when lifted, and a hand in a mitten feels the raised nap of sastrugi, like the grain of sawn wood. Out on an ice shelf, the sea beneath speaks through the slab as groans and knocks that carry far, turning the platform into an instrument struck by tide. A cautious hypothesis finds its usual bench at the edge of the scene. If travelers from beyond the air ever chose a continent to move unseen, they might favor the unvoiced center, where the surface changes slowly and human eyes seldom go. A vehicle that rests above bright ice would leave little shadow to be different from the sky's own shadows. A path flown along lines already used for mapping would be folded into the echo noise of ordinary measurements. If they wished to look within, they could read with long wavelength sight, as we do, and watch the buried rivers fill and drain, the same way a patient reader watches a tide clock, or, If they sought only a place to write a durable note, they might choose to melt a thin, flat lens deep within the sheet. No crater, no smoke where it would rest for millennia among the quiet layers. This remains a possibility only, placed beside other possibilities and allowed to cool. Against it stands the sufficiency of ice and stone. Radio echoes need only physics to draw the hidden ground. Subglacial lakes need only pressure, geothermal warmth, and salt to stay fluid. Mountain chains under the sheet can be explained by the same fold and fault that make ranges elsewhere. Meteorites gather on blue ice because wind and flow move the ice and reveal what fell everywhere. Frost flowers stand up because brine and cold teach them how. Auroras speak because the planet wears a magnetic cloak that channels the high sky's weather to the poles. The continent contains more than enough to sustain its wonders without any guest. The motif returns in an unhurried loop. The same seabed that once grew limestone and then lifted into ridge now lies ground to flower beneath the ice, moving toward a coast where shelves break and bloom. The same faint green veil that arched over first shores hangs above polar night, a patient handwriting never fully erased. The wedge of dustlight, shy but present, makes its small promise at the horizon, even in seasons when the sun fails to show. Far beneath, the hidden rivers answer a rhythm that recalls the pulse of tides breathed among reeds in warmer places. Far above, a curtain of night light bends as gently as a field of wheat. In distant ages, the sheet will thin here and thicken there. Land will rise where load is lifted. Buried valleys will host clear lakes again. A dark stone picked from blue ice will ring under a new hammer. The radio echoes will become new maps and then older maps, and the mountains under ice will either wake or continue their long sleep. For now, wind continues its even descent. Diamond dust spins and settles. Frost flowers breathe and are gone. The continent keeps its shadows under glass, patient and exact, and the world turns under a sky that holds the same quiet companions it has offered in every room of this long house of time. A cut into earth shows a page without letters. At the base lies a pale bed of river sand. Then a seam of brown where roots once threaded. Then a field of grey silt crossed by thin white veins that were once burrows. Then suddenly a dark band the width of a hand, sharp against the lighter layers above and below. The band smells faintly of charcoal when brought near warm breath. Charred seeds rest within it, black beads that keep the shape of their living forms. Tiny bones lie beside them, weightless as brushed husks. Above, the soil returns to its ordinary work. A weave of clay and fine sand, crumbs that hold together with a little pressure and fall apart with less. The section reads as calm, interrupted, and resumed. A grounded fact holds in such profiles. Fire leaves a record that lasts. Heat fixes carbon. Charcoal resists decay. Ash drifts into still water and falls as a pale cloud within the dark. When hills burn and rain follows, slopes lose their skin and send sheets of silt into floodplains and hollows. Sediment catches the day of burning and lays it down as a horizon. Later, roots thread again. Insects write their small tunnels, and pale soils build above the band with the same patience as before. A thin, rich stripe becomes a dateline, an even line connecting lowland to lowland across a broad country. Lesser-known work happens quietly inside particular grains, in a hearth floor or a wildland burn where temperatures climb high. Iron-bearing minerals pass through a warmth that writes orientation into them as they cool. The earth's field on that day becomes a whisper in the small stones, a favored direction kept by magnetite and hematite until they are reheated or weathered away. Lift a baked clod centuries later, and it carries, within its silent alignment, a compass leaf from when it last glowed. The soil remembers a sky no one now sees, not in colour but in the way its smallest pieces prefer to face. Not every heat in ground comes from flame that runs through grass and wood. On dry flats of sand, lightning sometimes finds a path and fuses grains into glass. The result is a branching tube that dives and forks, a route of light cast into stone. The glass, pale or smoking brown, carries bubbles strung like beads along a hair, tiny records of air turned liquid and then still. These fulgurites, pulled from dunes or riverbanks, are delicate and strong at once. A fossilized bolt that keeps the signature of storm where no tree stood to take the strike. In stony places, heat moves along fractures and leaves glassy seams within rock like frozen veins. Elsewhere, heat arrives not as a point, but as a sky-wide breath. In certain broad deserts, sheets of glass spread for miles, where sand once lay unremarkable. Their surfaces show flow lines like ripples mid-frozen. Their edges curl as though the ground shivered while molten and then stiffened. A measured reading suggests rare fire in air. Perhaps a burst that failed to touch ground directly, and yet pressed enough heat downward to soften a country briefly. The glass writes its own map under dust. Fragments lodged in dunes chime faintly against one another in wind, and their pale gleam at dawn looks like water until a boot heel finds their hardness. Mystery enters not with thunder, but with calm comparison. In distant valleys, thin, dark horizons appear near the same elevation, along many profiles, charcoal-rich, full of finely divided carbon, scattered with spherules that look like cooled droplets. Some horizons include melted bits of sand no larger than the point of a thorn. Some include mineral forms that prefer shock to slow fire. Pollen, above and below, says the land changed as the band arrived swamp to scrub, or grass to bare, and then changed again. Did wildfires, which are numerous and faithful as seasons, burn broader and hotter in those years? Did volcanoes cast distant ash that coaxed local flame to run long? Did a rare sky event add heat and dust together? The layers keep their address, the cause keeps its even reserve. In other places, walls built of ordinary stone show edges that have softened and flowed as if held to heat like pottery. On certain hilltops, the outer faces are vitrified rocks, fused into a rind that survives where the rubble behind has fallen. The old explanations hold sufficient ground. Deliberate fires kindled with peat and timber to strengthen walls or to erase them. Lightning storms that visited again and again. Accidental furnaces fed by wind in enclosed spaces. A gentler uncertainty turns the examples in hand. Why do some hills show this fusion and their neighbors not at all? Does the pattern follow rock alone? Or does it follow exposure to a wind that keeps flame in place? The stones give their gloss and hold their counsel. Small, lesser-known traces attend these more emphatic signs. In lowest plains, needle-thin tubes of glass lie among silt grains, as if rain fell as candles for a single minute thunder drops that carried enough heat to glaze, and then were gone. In lake mud, a layer holds near microscopic balls of iron whose skins are oxidized in a way that suggests quick heating in thin air and cooling in water. Under a lens, quartz grains in certain bands show straight, bright lines inside them, planes that slip only under sudden pressure, not under the ordinary patience of depth and time. None of this needs a story beyond the sky's normal habits of stone, wind, storm, and long, quiet weather. A cautious hypothesis lays itself beside the others with the usual restraint. If observers from beyond the air ever tested the surface with tools that exchange energy without landing beams to sound composition, fields to sense water, methods we do not yet use, then some narrow tracks of fused sand, some disks of altered clay, some brief rearrangements of magnetic preference could be the sort of notes such methods would leave. The hypothesis asks little. That high heat in a brief glance might mimic lightning without the branching, or a breath of particles might make a thin, glassy skin on a dune crest without a footprint. It remains one possibility among many and rests in the same drawer as questions about airbursts, volcanic breaths, and years of unusual drought. Against it stands the sufficiency of earth and sky. Fire is common and generous with its marks. Lightning answers to points and sands with fusing that can be held. Volcanoes scatter ash and heat, then lay quiet record in distant mud. The wind moves flame along ridgelines and holds it there with the obedience of pressure and topography. Even the rarest glasses need no more than the idea that sometimes the atmosphere itself carries the conditions for brief, widespread melting. Soil keeps all of this without choosing among it. It accepts yearly dust and once-in-an-age heat and puts them on adjacent shelves. Night arrives, and the trench edge takes a thin shadow that clarifies the bands. A moth rests on the dark horizon as if nesting in an old fire. Far above, the faint green veil the sky keeps for itself lays over the valley like a low aurora, easy to miss unless the eye has learned to wait. Along the eastern edge, the wedge of dustlight leans modestly, even when the moon is gone, and its incline seems to echo the tilt of the exposed page in the soil. Somewhere else, the same seabed mentioned before made limestone, then folded appears in this section only as crushed shell mixed into the layer above the dark band, a chaff of old ocean caught in a year of burning. In later seasons, rain will soften the profile, and the page will slump to an older, unreadable shape. Roots will cross the sharp line with new living penmanship. Ants will carry grains from one side to the other without concern for dating. Yet, the dark seam will remain under the fresh face, intact as an evening under a day. If lifted carefully and kept dry, it will keep the breath of the fire that made it long after the wind forgets. Whether any traveler ever read such pages from above and chose to write on them briefly is left to the same quiet shelf that holds all the other uncertainties. The ground is content with its entries. It closes over them slowly and offers them back with equal slowness, holding its silence, while the sky above keeps its patient lights and its habit of moving gently in place. In shaded rooms where clay cools and stone breathes dust, faces take form that prefer attention to rest. Cheeks are spared detail. Mouths quiet themselves into lines. Foreheads become smooth plains that accept light like morning water. Eyes, by contrast, are made wide and alert. Ovals cut deep and rimmed to hold inlays. Circles drilled to receive white shell and dark centers. Polished stones pressed until they return a lamp's small flame. On pedestals and in niches, the gazes lift and do not blink. In courtyards, silent as held breath. A row of heads keeps watch on the same narrow slice of sky, where a blade of dawn is expected to appear. A grounded fact remains steady beneath this style. Across many lands and centuries, images of people simplify toward the features most useful to recognition and meaning. Eyes enlarge, hands repeat the gesture they need to keep, bodies reduce to clear proportions. Heads also change in life, not only in art. Where infants' skulls are wrapped and guided for custom and belonging, bone follows the nudge of cloth and board, lengthening or flattening as it grows. Sutures allow this gentle persuasion, and the shape becomes a sign of community. The practice leaves skulls that look elongated to later eyes, without requiring any visitor from beyond the air to explain them. Culture is sufficient, and bone obeys time. Lesser-known details gather in the making. Eye sockets are undercut to keep inlays firm when rooms cool. Thin channels are carved from pupil to crown so adhesive can breathe and set. A small notch at the lower lid holds a bead of oil so the white continues to gleam. A dark seed pressed at the center turns lamplight into a moving point when anyone passes. And faces seem to follow with patience rather than demand. On figures carved from pale limestone, a dilute mineral wash gives the eyes a soft, mirroring sheen. In clay, a final burnish with a smooth pebble closes pores until the iris takes a quiet polish. Even when pigment fades, these subtle preparations remain, and the gaze keeps a tempered brightness. The workshop holds its own weather. Strings measure noses, straightedges settle ears. A turned stick with soot-blackened tip marks pupils at the same interval along a shelf. When figures stand together, Their eyes set the cadence of a wall. Glance, glance, stillness, glance, glance, stillness, repeated until a room learns the feeling of order. The same mathematics that moderates courtyards, moderates faces, ratios that halve and double until a whole looks inevitable. Where stone runs scarce, clay supplies abundance, smoothed by reed and cloth, until brow and cheek are a continuous curve that invites the sky to rest upon it. A hiss of wet slip, a faint rasp of grit on copper. The breathing of those who work. The room's minute sounds weave with the steady presence of the watching heads. A calm uncertainty belongs to the repetition across oceans. In far valleys and islands separated by days of sail or nothing but wind, figures appear with eyes like moons and heads that lengthen toward an arc. Not every region binds infants. Not every tradition favors the same proportions. Yet the similarity of attention, the will to enlarge the organ of watchfulness, returns. Is this simply because an eye is a near circle framed by an almond, and hands, when they reach for a sign of presence, arrive at that pairing without instruction? Or do the habits of night keeping vigil for a rising, reading a horizon without noise, teach different places to make the same face of readiness? The question holds its seat without insisting on an answer. A second grounded fact sets these faces into time. The planet's slow wobble shifts familiar night patterns across ages, while the need for long seeing remains. Watching risings and settings demands steady attention, even when the map overhead changes by finger widths in a lifetime. Figures that keep the shape of attention become companions to this work, their fixed gazes reminding rooms to attend when morning and evening ask for witness. In certain sanctuaries, on specific days, a blade of light travels across eyes at the year's corner and comes to rest in a pupil as if the head were made to swallow dawn. The moment passes and returns with the season, and the face continues its stillness in between. Lesser-known, tactile truths hide behind the gaze. On some heads, a faint abrasion above the brow records the touch of cloth tied there season after season. On others, pores in limestone drink pigment faster around the eyes, leaving rings that deepen with each renewal. When weather dries for long weeks, a crystalline crust grows on exposed cheeks, a salt bloom lifted from the ground's breath. When rains return, the bloom dissolves, and the features recover without harm. A lucid bruise appears, where a mirror-dark inlay sits. Obsidian polishes to a gentle green when the lamp is low, as though a faint echo of the upper air's sheen had come indoors. At dawn, dew finds the lashes of low relief and hangs there as small lenses, briefly multiplying the eye. Mystery takes a modest seat, where likenesses exceed coincidence. Heads that stretch into smooth ovals, necks long as reeds, shoulders sloped like dunes recur in countries that do not share rivers or speech. Some say the form follows materials clay, more willing to pull than to bulge, reed mats encouraging long silhouettes, chisels preferring straight cuts. Others propose that beings imagined to live nearer the sky are given attributes that suggest distance from ordinary flesh. Larger eyes that find faint light, faces thinned of detail like stones worn by wind. The conjectures remain tempered by sufficiency. The earth offers many reasons to make these choices without needing visitors to be their cause. The ground continues to explain with patience. Artificial head shaping comes of simple means: boards, wraps, cradle slopes, time. Eyes enlarge in images because vision governs meeting. A face carved to be seen by torch must speak from across a hall. Proportions echo across continents because bodies share measures of comfort and clarity, and because the circle and the almond are forms any hand can draw in dust. Workshops that never exchange a word nevertheless share the same heavens, the same daily geometries of door, court, and horizon. Likeness arises the way parallel rivers carve similar meanders without consultation. Yet a cautious hypothesis, kept with the others on the long shelf, imagines that if observers beyond air ever visited and wished to be acknowledged without changing the ground, the trait that would most faithfully convey them might be their attention itself. if their practices favored long night vision, or if their faces belonged to environments with different light. A figure seen at dusk could leave the memory of widened eyes, smooth features, and a certain stillness. Those who met such a sight might enlarge the organ of watchfulness on their own figures, not as flattery or fear, but as recognition, a calm attempt to hold the look that held them. The idea rests quietly beside the rest, and asks for no more than room. Lesser-known echoes extend the thought without proof. In some rooms, eye inlays are cut from mirror-dark glass that shows a faint green at certain hours, as if it kept the high sky's veil indoors. In others, the whites come from shell that once lay on a seabed, later lifted into limestone, the old ocean returned as sight. Pupils drilled slightly off-center create the impression of a common focus toward a door or a slit in the roof. When the wedge of dust light rises before dawn, that shared gaze appears to welcome it. A narrow channel hidden behind the brow sometimes leads from eye to crown, not for mystery, but so that adhesives cure and the inlay breathes. Yet the unseen passage lets a light draft pass, and a standing face becomes a small instrument humming to the room's minute currents. The motif of light and dust continues to sew these rooms into one. The same wedge that rose over the first shore leans above a line of faces set east. The same faint green sheen that graced the ridge floats above roofs when lamps are out. The same seabed that became limestone now shapes cheeks that drink the morning wash. In a canyon where discs are pecked into varnish, a small clay head with bright inlays rests in a niche and looks toward the same notch in the horizon. In a high chamber once used to measure a winter beam, a row of shell-eyed figures keeps their attention on the aperture, receiving a single, annual stroke of sun like a quiet lesson. In later weather, some eyes fall silent when their inlays loosen and are lost. Others remain vivid when a new hand replaces the white with river pearl or burned bone. A statue tipped by an earthquake sleeps on its side for 100 years, and its down-facing pupil preserves a small dome of lamp smoke that later cleaners leave intact as a remnant of breath. Figures taken from damp ground carry a skin of mineral that, when gently lifted, shows an underbrightness as if the gaze were newly made. Whether the same eyes appear in many lands because hands love the same clarity, or because a memory once crossed between stars and settled into clay, the faces keep their even duty. They look and keep looking, while night performs its slow offices. The faint veil curving above, the dust-light wedge preparing its incline, and the old seabed, now a wall holding the stillness in which attention can live. Stone holds a quiet compass long after hands leave it. In rooms once warmed by kilns and hearths, in bricks that hardened under summer sun and then under greater heat. Invisible needles inside common minerals come to attention and keep their bearing. Clay that glowed red learns the direction the planet's field preferred on that afternoon and will keep it through rain and centuries unless heated again. Basalt poured as night lava and cooled beneath stars does the same. A wall, a pot, a paving slab, a flow, each becomes a page where warmth wrote a line in iron's smallest script, and the line remains legible to instruments gentle enough to ask. A grounded fact rests beneath this quiet. When certain grains, magnetite, hematite, titanomagnetite, cool through a narrow window of temperature, their domains settle and align with Earth's field, acquiring a remnant magnetization that persists. Archaeomagnetism reads that persistence to date hearth floors and fired bricks. Paleomagnetism follows it into lavas and lake mud to trace how the field has wandered, weakened, strengthened, and, at intervals irregular in their patience, reversed. On the seafloor, the story widens into stripes as new crust forms along long ridges and cools. It takes the field's sign of the moment. As the field flips, bands of opposite polarity are laid down symmetrically left and right of the ridge, a zebra that stretches for oceans. Stone remembers heat, and through that memory, the planet's own invisible weather sketches itself in rock. Lesser-known details live in the small. A pot fired at the edge of a kiln, where the draft flickered, holds a mixed magnetization, a blurred note from a wavering field of embers overlaid by the firm core of the planet outside. A floor of packed clay, reheated again and again by small lamps, shows a shallow overprint, all aligned to a niche where flame always sat. A brick, stamped with a maker's mark, bears, inside its iron grains, a different stamp, a direction that confirms it cooled in situ rather than in a heap and later moved. Even glass can carry a ghost obsidian blades, cooled quickly, sometimes hold the faintest preference, a memory so small that it only answers when asked with great care. Ruins learned by instrument become maps of vanished fires. Walk with a recorder along an old street, and gentle swells in the magnetic field reveal where ovens once stood behind walls, where a smith kept a slow heat, where a pit of ash lies just under dust. In one corner, a starburst anomaly shows where lightning found a finial and ran into stone, leaving a cone of altered magnetization under the strike. In another, a belt of stronger signal lines, a long foundation, a row of bricks cooled together under brand new roof, their domains agreeing like a choir on a single note. Where nothing visible remains, the field keeps the plan. Mystery survives and keeps its tone. In a few places, the magnetism does not align neatly with any obvious cause. Along one fort's rim, fused stone, already a quiet question, carries a strong, even magnetization, as though it cooled under a field far greater than ordinary, yet not as chaotic as lightning's brief hand. On another hill, a run of common rock well away from hearths shows an isothermal remnant's grains, rearranged not by heat, but by exposure to a strong field at room temperature. Did lightning run again and again along those faces, each strike writing a steady layer over earlier disorder? Did long, smouldering fires act like broad, patient kilns? The explanations compete gently and leave space around the stones. Beyond ruins, basalt flows and baked soils preserve the field's larger moods. A cliff of dark rock, stacked flow upon flow, records a reversal in stages. Lowermost, the invisible needles point one way. Midway, their confusion testifies to a time when the field weakened and wandered. Uppermost, the needles settle into their opposite with the composure of a lake smoothed after wind. Lake beds do similar work, but with silt instead of fire. Iron-bearing grains falling through quiet water orient to the field as they rest, layering a diary of direction and strength that can be read grain by grain. The planet's magnetic cloak, lifted by nothing visible, moves through long changes that art and hearth enclose in the smallest of letters. Lesser-known gifts nest in those letters. In a mud core taken from an old harbour, one thin lamina holds a field slightly rotated from its neighbours. The clay was warmed by a summer of shallows, and then cooled, slowly under a different wind pattern, its own small climate pressing a delicate bias into the record. In a layer of brick dust spread to level a floor, grains carry mixed signals from many kilns. A civic palimpsest of heat that a careful reading can dissolve into contributions from several quarters of a vanished city. In cave soot blackening a ceiling, iron minerals from lamp smoke align at the moment the smoke cools and fix a directional whisper directly above where a hand once held a flame. Questions keep their manners where anomalies remain. A few temples and towers, when surveyed, show long, coherent zones of magnetic strengthening within stone that was never meant for ovens and shows no surface sign of fusion. The simplest answer points downward. Lightning, again, striking edges and parapets, running through iron in mortar or through moisture along joints, leaving quiet imprints of unanticipated intensity. Yet some belts lie unfavored by storm, and some patterns repeat along lengths as though guided. Are there overlooked pathways, minerals aligned by quarrying, hidden drains that focused current, scaffolds of lost wood that once set roots for fire? Or are these simply the kinds of arrangements that patience and chance can produce when years, wind, and occasional electricity collaborate? A cautious hypothesis takes its customary seat. If observers ever worked from above, with fields rather than feet, probing subsoil, reading water, or testing masonry, then a narrow, transient, magnetizing breath might accompany their methods. Such a breath could give bricks a shallow isothermal remanence without charring them, or nudge grains in walls just enough to leave a rope of quietly altered stone where a beam once hung, like dew frozen into a spider's line, and later sublimed away. The hypothesis does not claim. It sits beside lightning, smolder, and the many ways heat and current already move through Earth, offered as one more possible sentence in the same alphabet. Against it stands sufficiency again. Lightning magnetizes and melts. Fires in walls raise temperatures hidden to eyes and faithful to instruments. Slow warmth from seasons overprints shallows and mantles floors. Basalt and brick alike freeze the field they know as they cool. That the field reverses is itself a patient fact, not a riddle that needs visitors. That seafloors carry stripes is a consequence of crust born in order and moving outward. That bricks point the same way in a row says more about kiln hours than any external hand. The planet prints its own long story into stone. Human heat adds marginalia. Storms make their flourishes. Evening reduces contrast until the instruments do the seeing. Above a wall, the faint green veil resumes its planetary handwriting. Along the horizon, the wedge of dust light inclines again like a chalk line lifted by dim hands. A magnetometer's soft beeps drift into the courtyard's breathing as if measuring pulse. In the trench nearby, the dark band that once kept charcoal now lies still. Beyond the city, a ridge of basalt remembers a flip older than any room. The same seabed that rose to limestone and then to hill still keeps, far out, its magnetic zebra beside the ridge, where new rock learns the latest sign. Lesser-known stillnesses arrive when lamps are out. A warm wall exhales and cools toward the night. Somewhere in its body, near the Curie point of a particular grain, a last domain chooses its place and stays. Dew condenses on a lintel and thus briefly increases the stone's conductivity. A fog of charge passes along the surface and is gone. The wall keeps nothing of that breath. A flake of rust falls from an old nail in mortar and adds its tiny needle to the choir, one more voice aligned to the field of this hour. No one hears these adjustments. The record nonetheless acquires them with composure. In later ages, the bricks will be repurposed. Walls will be taken down, and their stones turned so their old magnetization points sideways or down. New hearths will reheat some floors and overwrite their entries. Lightning will choose another finial. Basalt cliffs will spall and reveal fresher surfaces where the old flip still sleeps. A reader in a future courtyard will walk again with a patient instrument and find some of the same invisible rooms and some that ours missed. Whether any note from beyond the air ever pressed itself into this quiet script does not disturb the field's own continuity. Stone remembers heat and shows the memory when asked softly. The sky keeps its veil and its dust light. The earth turns its compass within the mineral, like a slow breath held for ages and let out over longer ages still. A low bank of earth runs for the length of a field and then bends to greet a distant notch. Beyond the bank, the horizon lies wide and even, a shallow bowl with 3 dark teeth. One small hill, one sharper saddle, one round summit far away. The bank is not tall enough to stop wind. It is tall enough to steady sight. At its end, a gap opens, and through that gap, the sun lifts on one morning each year and pours a blade of light along a packed path. On another morning, far across the calendar, the blade runs down a parallel way and pauses in a marked place. Between these events, the bank keeps its quiet, accepting weather and the weight of small animals that prefer its lee. Timber once stood here, and it stands again in memory beneath the grass. Dark circles in the soil, ghosts of posts long gone tell, where rings of wood rose and looked outward, The posts were replaced as they softened. Rings shifted as the horizon asked for adjustment. Oak darkened to black jelly underground and left a clean edge that remains when the wood itself has gone. In wet seasons, the circles collect dew a little longer after sunrise than the soil around them. In dry seasons, a thin rim of light dust corrugates their circumference, as if the place keeps drawing its own plan in faint strokes, even after the plan is buried. Beyond the timber, stone lines extend like ribs to the horizon and stop at its features. One points to the small hill where the late winter sun rests before it climbs. Another meets the saddle where the moon, in its rarest reach, settles like a shallow bowl. Every generation and a half, a third attends to a star that returns to the same rising after a long handful of years, and then misses again as the sky's slow wandering continues. No explanation is written into the banks or the stones. They are bodies that face and keep facing, leaving the reasons to pass like wind across them. A grounded fact lives in these small fidelities. Certain sky rhythms repeat within lengths longer than a life, but short enough to be held in story and in stone. Eclipses come back with regular differences after a long count of seasons. Within the span of 2 decades, the moon reaches farther than usual along the horizon. And then, less far again. A bright planet draws a slow flower against dawn and dusk and returns near its original petal after 8 years. None of these requires names or tables to be kept. Sightlines, kept straight across generations, do the work of writing them. A post moved a hand's width by a patient successor can keep a long cycle alive without any mark other than the posts themselves. Lesser-known acts of care gather around thresholds and apertures. In one earth room, a thin slab is set with a shaved edge. For most of the year, the thin edge eats light and remains unlit. But on a morning near the year's balance, a ribbon of brightness fits the thickness exactly and runs along it like a seam being sewn. In a rock wall, a narrow slit holds a look at a particular dawn and is plastered each year with fresh clay to refine the edge as the masonry settles. The finger marks dry into ripples that later readers mistake for ornament, though they are simply the measure of attention. In a timber circle, the lintel above a certain opening is dressed with a strip of pale quartz, so that the returning morning lays a quick crawl on it and moves on. Purpose remains as even as the banks. Such places help fields remember their season. They allow the keeping of seed and harvest, light and length, without argument. They also extend attention past the reach of one life. A child learns where the long morning will enter in 8 years when a planet returns. An elder knows where the moon will sit in winter beyond any line he will see. The works do not hurry their answers. They are calendars measured by the stride, instruments the size of walking and of walls. People pass along the keeping as they pass along ploughs and vessels, not as command, but as habit, like learning where the river's old ford lies under a new bank. Mystery speaks here in duration. Why build for a return one will not witness? Why set a mark for a year that belongs to someone not yet born? Some will answer that the steadiness itself is the reason that belonging to intervals larger than one life gives a house its depth. Others will say that authority rests in the power to predict, and so the marks prove a center's care for its fields. A gentler uncertainty adds that perhaps the thought of return, whether planetary or human, warms rooms in a way that daily bread does not. The banks remain indifferent to motives. They face and keep facing. A second, smaller truth belongs to the ground's memory of these very acts. Where posts stood in rings, the soil's iron grains learned the day's field as they were fired by nearby hearths or by long sun under dark surfaces. And they hold that orientation still. Where bricks lined a passage that accepted a yearly beam, their smallest domains carry that era's sign. Under grass, the plan of long attention lies like a pale watermark within the earth, legible to hands that ask with quiet instruments. Even when stones are stolen, the horizon lines can be found again by reading the lingering script the place wrote to itself. Lesser-known companions attend the long waits. Bees come to winter in openings, cut through banks, sensing the still air and the slight warmth stored in earth. Their soft talk fills a corridor at noon and leaves by dusk. In the weeks when frost blooms before sunrise, rims of hoar trace the tops of low walls, and an attentive eye can see which courses keep the cold longest, those facing the returning morning. Before dawn in dry months, the wedge of dustlight stands up from the horizon, where the gap points, showing that the sky also keeps a long-lived plan. A faint diagram that repeats in all rooms of the world. At night, the upper veil lifts green as continually as it has over coasts, deserts, ridges, and ice. The banks feel it on their unlit faces and keep their silence. Questions linked to far visitors sit where they have sat all along, without crowding the scene. Some accounts speak of measures kept for those who promised to come back, when certain heavens returned, when a bright planet made its old rose, when the moon settled again in the far notch, when an eclipse strung its darkness across noon, as it had in a remembered year. If observers beyond the air ever favoured such appointments, long-line places like these would have been natural clocks, the appointments carved into earth rather than spoken. A cautious hypothesis imagines a passer-by seeing this patience from high banks, reiterating east and west. Circles answering the moon's far reach, apertures set to long mornings, and choosing to arrive when the measures concurred. The idea is allowed to rest among the others. It changes nothing of the bank's day-to-day. Against that thought stands the sufficiency of human reasons. Grain ripens when light and heat agree. Lambing follows grass. Festivals anchor remembrance and make work bearable. A horizon learned by eye can time all of these. The recurrence of a planet close to its former path is enough to anchor vows and markets. The return of a long moon to its rarest angle is enough to read a generation by. These are ample reasons to face and keep facing. The ground requires no guest to justify its instruments. Elsewhere, far steps away, other waiting horizons keep their own company. On an island ridge, a low slab frames the last red of the sun as it walks along the sea, at a time counted by waves, not by walls. In a valley ringed by hills, white stones mark the balanced days, so that a traveller can stand at centre and see the line between seasons made visible. In a high place where timber cannot long endure, a notch in the rock receives the winter beam and writes it briefly on a polished face, then lets it go. Seasons heap and pass with almost no trace, except a long habit of footsteps kept in grit. The motif returns, with its composure. The same seabed that once took ripple marks from tide now stands as a distant ridge. The round summit that a line greets. The faint green veil writes its planet-wide calm over these fields, just as it did over the first shores. The wedge of dustlight is the very ladder that gaps aim toward when dawn is still an idea. The slow drift of the pole, noted softly long ago, steals a post's precision and persuades a successor to move it the width of a finger. Nothing hurries. Waiting and adjustment are the craft. In later centuries, fields shift, banks slump. A farmer turns a buried post circle with his plough and wonders at the dark rings in the slice. Children run the old avenues without knowing they are avenues. A new wall uses stone robbed from the ribs that once faced the saddle, yet the horizon remains, and a future hand can stand in the stubble and recover the original line by joining notch to stone shadow and listening to the page within the soil. Whether anyone ever came by appointment is left where it belongs, among possibilities that neither add nor subtract from the sufficiency of people leaning their sight against earth to keep time. The horizon waits, and the world moves through the measures it has always kept, as gently and exactly as breath. Night turns like a great slow instrument, and the river of stars pours from one rim of the world to the other. It is not a river of water. It is grain upon grain of light laid along a dark bed, with black shoals, where dust in space thickens, with bends and bars that repeat each year in their season. Yet across long spans the river's course against the horizon alters. A watcher who sets a line to catch the moment when that bright band stands upright at dusk will find, in later lives, that the band leans. A gate that once framed the river's dark rift like a cleft of night now opens to emptier sky. The heavens keep faith with themselves and also slide, as earlier rooms already learned when the northern point wandered. Stones and banks remember older arrangements. On a ridge where a notch accepted mid-summer's first bright, an avenue also once received the river when it rose like a slow, pale wall. The avenue still faces as it did, but the wall arrives at a different hour and angle. The old coincidence has softened into an almost. In broad plains, lines that connect low mounds echo a small cluster that now sits higher or lower than it did when the lines were set. A patient hand can see how closely they once agreed and how gently they now diverge, like tracks that began together and parted by the width of a reed. A grounded fact supports the scene without needing names. Stars do not keep still. The sky's great map, already known to drift because the world's axis draws its wide circle, also changes in the positions of the points themselves. Some lights creep almost imperceptibly. Some shift enough in many lifetimes to alter the shapes that eyes make into figures. The river remains a river, but its bends against the horizon at given hours are not the same in all ages. Alignments set to those bends preserve the instant when ground and sky made their tightest rhyme. Later, the rhyme loosens and keeps its meter in other ways. Lesser-known gifts glimmer within the band. Where the river splits into a dark lane, the path is not absence, but presence, dust, and cold clouds, hiding light and making a black current down the stream. On clear blue-black nights when wind sleeps and the air holds steady, that current shows structure like the grain in wood, soft tongues and scallops that seem to flow. In early hours of summer, pale nebulae lie like gathered breath along the river's arch. In deep autumn, the stream thins and turns to bright gravel. Sometimes a faint counter-river appears, the broad, low wedge of dust light that leans up from the horizon carries the same angle the band will cross at midnight months later, as if dawn and night were practicing each other's lines. In quiet deserts and on high ledges, patterns pecked into stone echo the river's brightness as scatter rather than line. Not figures of deer or discs, but fields of dots, dense where the sky shows many and sparse where it is poor, with a narrow, snaking emptiness through the middle that could be the dark rift. These dot panels are modest, no claim of a map, only a suggestion of crowd and gap. But when placed beside the sky that now passes above them, they seem a little off. Placed beneath the sky as it would have looked long before, they answer more crisply. The stones, content either way, keep both possibilities without insisting on which is intended. Purpose remains as measured as ever. The river's rising in a certain stance signals seasons as reliably as any star's first dawn appearance. Its uprightness at twilight can be used to count nights between harvest and frost. Its late winter arch can serve as a frame for festivals that wait for the year to quicken. Long rooms and open banks that attend to these entries teach bodies where to stand and where to look. If the river's hour shifts across generations, the habit moves with it. A post turned a hand's width, a threshold adjusted, the act of attention taught again to the next child by the line of shoulders at dusk. Mystery keeps its calm, gathered in places where ground seems to mirror an older sky with a fidelity that is no longer exact. Groups of mounds, arranged in a pattern that once overlaid a familiar asterism, now sit a little too wide at one end, a little too tight at the other. A causeway that once matched the river's tilt on a particular evening now aims a degree past it. Did those who built these lines intend a sketch of the starry field? Or did function and chance lay out forms that later eyes choose to see as maps? The question is left to lie like dew in the morning, visible to those who look low, disappearing when heat rises. Elsewhere, Water takes a lesson from the sky and writes a self-similar script. At night, river bends mirror the band above by accident of angle and season, the earthly curve catching the celestial one in a passing sympathy. Canal planners straighten a reach until it runs like a taut cord toward the place where the band will lift at a certain hour, not to honor the sky but to follow grade. Yet in doing so, they set a terrestrial reference that later walkers use to recall a long-gone alignment. The world seems to prefer to rhyme with itself, even when no ear is tuned for rhyme. A cautious hypothesis, set with the others on the quiet shelf, imagines that if any visitors beyond the air ever wished to acknowledge those on the ground who watched with long patience, they might have timed their glides to stand upon these recurrences, appearing when the river rose upright at evening, or when the dust-light wedge and the band made a precise crossing before dawn. By choosing nights when many eyes were already lifted for reasons of season and return, they would write their presence into existing calendars rather than onto bare sky. If they returned after spans long enough for the river's tilt to change, they might test whether their earlier appointments had been remembered by the new angle of gate and avenue. Against that thought stands sufficiency. The need to measure long nights and intervals between labors accounts for attention to the river as completely as any external guest. The sliding of alignments through generations follows directly from the slow drift previously noted. Fields that resemble the starry channel need not be maps at all, but could be games of scatter, teaching patterns to fingers and eyes. Even the urge to connect mounds to asterisms may grow from the body's habit of finding order where order can be drawn with few strokes. The Earth's reasons are entire and do not ask for additions. Lesser known, delicate evidences mark the changes. In a set of dry pits that once held upright poles, the soil took on a taste of darkness when those poles shaded it year after year. Centuries later, the darker ovals still show, and their small offsets across time reveal that a line was recast 3 or 4 times to keep its meeting with a rising that no longer rose where it first did. A lintel, dressed with a pale seam of quartz, holds a record of light crawling at a slightly different pace in old summers than in recent ones. The seam's sheen polished by the same event at the same week, arriving at a shifted minute and angle. These are not proofs of anything beyond patience and adjustment, but they are proofs of the motifs of earlier rooms return and sew this one into the whole. The faint green veil belongs to these nights as to every night. It lays its patient wash above the river's fine gravel, above knobs of stone, above the same seabed lifted into ridge that, in another section, watched winter dawn through a gate. The wedge of dust-light leans each morning in the direction the river favors later, like an echo that precedes the shout. Fired clay in nearby hearths again keeps the direction of the day's field as a whisper, while beneath a bank, the dark band of an old burn lies in its thin page and remembers ash. In a later age, the river will take another stance at dusk, and gates built now to receive it will misfit slightly and then more. A line of mounds that once made a neat answer to a small cluster will fall out of rhyme. A careful hand will move a stake, a threshold will be shaved, a record will be kept in body rather than in words, and then that body will teach another. Whether anyone beyond the air ever chose to step into these patterns when they were at their tightest remains a quiet possibility among others. The ground goes on facing, the sky goes on sliding, the river of light continues its soft work of crossing the world as if the planet were turning under a vaulted stream, which it is, and the watchers continue to breathe with it until the hour arrives to sleep. The world settles into a hush that feels like water held perfectly still. Stones keep their faces turned. Dunes lie as folded cloth. Ice waits with blue interior light. Clay cools and remembers the day's faint compass. Old seabed breathes through limestone without moving. Above all of it, the night rests in a single, even tone. The faint green veil is present the way breath is present, felt more than seen, spread thin over continents and quiet roofs. Along the horizon, the soft wedge lifts and holds, a pale stair that does not ask to be climbed. Nothing approaches, nothing departs. The rooms of Earth simply keep their company with the sky. Shadows soften until they are only deeper quiet. Thresholds remember light without desiring it. Corridors hold their directions like thoughts that no longer need words. In the canyon, discs sleep under a film of stone. On the plateau, snow speaks silence in small crystals no ear can hear. In the desert, buried lines do not stir. Their geometry trusts the cool hours to return in their own time. By the water, drowned posts remain upright in their slow forest, content to stand in salt clarity. Each keeps shape as if the universe were a place where keeping is its gentlest law. Far above, the river of stars becomes a texture rather than a path. A soft grain pressed upon the dark. Its brightness lowers into the body like a calm weight. No alignment waits, no beam crosses, no appointment approaches. There is only the evenness of a planet at rest within its measures, held by distances too large to trouble sleep, and by nearnesses so patient they become air. Eyes close while the sky continues, unhurried and entire. The world breathes once more, and then lets the breath linger.